If you're
Yeah,
ready, I am ready.
I'm ready.
All right.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's crash this popsicle stand or whatever they say. Whatever the
I don't
kids
think
are
they say
saying.
that. I've never heard anyone say
I'm pretty
that.
sure I heard Bambi say it in the first 15 minutes of the movie,
Crash?
actually.
Crash this popsicle sound?
Yeah,
Isn't
because
it
he's
blow the
driving a popsicle stand and
I don't
or
think
his
that's how
mom
the
is, I
expression.
think. It's the woman drivers,
She's a working class woman. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, look at that. We're live. And we're talking about 2D animated Disney movies again. Look at
Yeah,
that. Been a little
we're gonna be
while.
on a little kick of that for a week or two actually, because next week I'm hopefully I'm planning on Saludos Amigos and Song of the South. We're gonna knock the wartime movies out because I think
Oh,
they're gonna be a
next
little
week?
thin. Yeah, that's the plan. Bambi
Oh,
now, wartime movies later.
okay.
So
Well,
buckle up.
I'm I'm hearing this plan for the first time, but that's all right. Anyway,
It
no,
sure is.
that should be just fine unless something very pressing comes up to talk about. Hello, everyone in the chat. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're having a fine Sunday. Hope you're having a fine Groundhog Day. Oh, I didn't actually look up. Do we know if the little creature decided what the weather's going to be yet?
Oh no, I didn't. I haven't
Let's
heard
see.
if
Groundhog Day. What do you say? Results. Clicks and Body Phil predicts 6 more weeks of winter. That little
little
bastard.
fucker.
Yeah, why would he do that to us?
Covering
Well,
He's the reason New Orleans is covered in snow. Thanks.
oh, I
Ian.
didn't know
Shit.
that.
I heard something like I don't know if it is anymore, but I heard that they got a good clip or a good amount of snow at one
Oh,
point.
they did. Yeah, I
Yeah,
saw, like people throwing snowballs on Bourbon Street, which I
that's
assume
wild.
doesn't happen very often. Yeah. But yes, anyway, 6 more weeks of winter. I gotta watch Groundhog Day again soon. That's a good movie. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about Bambi, 1942's Bambi, courtesy of Walt Disney and Company. Yeah, we didn't really give you much warning that we're talking about this one, but it's been out for a while, so
Yeah,
that's all right.
we will be spoiling it.
Yeah.
So
Nick the
get ready.
Greek asks, thank you for the super chat, Nick. Asks, I wonder which woman of color will be cast as Bambi in the live action remake. Are they planning a live action remake? I mean, I'm sure they
I
are, but I've not actually heard about that one.
That would
But
be
it would be, I guess, 3D animated, like
yeah.
The Lion King. Let's see. Is that actually something in the
I
pipeline?
have not heard anything about that.
Um, I see articles about a year ago talking about people attached to the project, and then I haven't heard anything about it. So I'm assuming they want to eventually, but maybe
That's not Disney. Okay, that is a different thing. There is a movie called Bambi: The Reckoning.
that would be one of those new, like, since it's
Yeah,
in the
Winnie the
public
Pooh, Blood
domain.
and Honey. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, I've not seen any of those. I don't know if I really want to. Maybe it'll be interesting to check out eventually, but yes. I'm
What
sure
is
there will
this?
be. Actually, you know what? If Snow White flops completely, it might
It
put an
might.
end to those, or at
Yeah.
least dampen them for a while. But if it makes enough money for them to see it as a hit, then they'll just keep going. So I guess we have 3D animated, though they'll call it live action Bambi to look forward to. So
Uh,
that's fun.
Yeah, here's an art. This is an article from 2020. Disney planning on confirmed they are developing a Bambi 3D animated live action, photorealistic remake. Hiring Captain Marvel's screenwriters to do the script. I think that
Why?
probably fell through. It's been
Yeah,
5 years.
it sounds like it. Yeah.
I don't think that flew. Did not go very far. They'll probably bring it back if Snow White, like you said, makes a fuckload of money, and their strategy, is once again, what's the word
I hope
I'm
they
looking
can.
for? It's like confirmed, but like
Greenlit?
no, like proven correct. Like what's
Sure.
yeah that is like
I know what you mean.
yeah.
Personally, I'm hoping for Aquafina as a gender swapped Bambi. That's my personal preference. If you had to pick Hugh, who would you who would you cast?
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with Lupita Nyong'o.
Mm.
Uh-huh.
No,
Yeah.
but she's actually good.
Yeah, but I think that would really helped to sell Bambi to a newer, more urban generation.
I
And
like Lupita Nyong'o. I'd like to, I haven't. I know she's done some voice acting recently. I believe she's in The Wild Robot, which I still have not seen, but will at some point. But I've not seen her in anything live action in quite a while, and that's a shame because she's good.
yeah, is there a reason? Is she given a reason for why she hasn't been in much, or is she just like taking a
I don't
break?
know. I haven't checked in on her in a while. Hey, Lupita, how's it going over there?
Lapita, if you're in the chat, please just, tell us what's up, reach out. We're all friends here. God,
Anyway, so
Aquafina as
today
Bambi would be. Ugh.
it would be something.
Yeah. No, I see. I'm going more with the whole idea of I don't know if you remember the talk about this for a while, that Disney was thinking about making Magneto black because apparently the modern day struggle of African Americans is akin to the past struggle of Jews during the Holocaust, and so that would have been like a one for one um, translation to them at one point. And
Uh, I'm not gonna touch that with a 10-foot pole. Let's talk about Bambi.
yes,
Bambi, you might know, is a movie that came out in 1942. It is an animated talking animals movie, courtesy of Walt Disney and RKO Pictures. This is back before Disney was actually a distribution studio, a distribution company. All their movies were distributed by RKO back in the day. And definitely a classic movie. There's lots of famous things from it, but I don't know about you, Hugh. I I when I was rewatching it again for today's stream, I had forgotten a good deal of what actually happens in this movie, and I started to wonder to myself if I've ever actually seen it all the way through or not. Because like the back half of the movie, I was like, I don't remember this at all. And so,
I had a very similar experience, and I was talking to my girlfriend while we were getting ready to watch it. And right before I hit play, I had this revelation that I don't think I had ever seen this movie outside of a dentist's office before.
yeah.
Like back in the 90s when you went to the dentist and they had a VCR full and all the Disney movies,
hmm
and you could just like sit there for hours while your brother was screaming his head off getting his teeth drilled. And you could ignore it because there's cute little animals up on the screen, and you got
Yes.
all the Disney movies that you don't got at home. That was my experience with this movie. I did not remember hardly any of it past the mom getting shot,
Yes, that's
actually.
definitely the most famous part of it. Before we continue, is there a reason that Chad is not on screen? Have they not been
They have
good?
not been living according to the laws of Allah. So, uh,
Mm, what
the,
a shame.
uh,
You guys got to do better. Do
do
better,
better,
Senator.
Senator.
Yes. Anyway, so let's talk about Bambi. Bambi is, I guess you could say, a continuation of what Walt Disney was learning from the three previous, actually no, four previous movies he had made at this point: Snow White, Pinocchio, Fantasia,
Fantasia.
and Dumbo. Is that cute animals sell, baby? And so this is probably the
Yeah.
most cute animals doing cute things of any of his movies.
Well, funnily
I
enough,
would.
this was supposed to be the second one. Actually, he
Mm,
wanted this to be his follow up to Snow White, but they had a real difficult time getting the animal animations right, and so they pivoted
yeah,
to Pinocchio. Um,
that makes sense.
I've heard some conflicting reports about that. Pinocchio apparently did not perform wonderfully at the box office for him. Fantasia
Okay.
definitely did not. Dumbo was
Yeah.
kind of a return to form, but it also was sort of like a little underwhelming. And this one, he kind of was very much hoping that it would be a rousing success. And then somebody dropped some bombs on a couple of boats in Hawaii, and that threw a wrench into the machine a little bit as well. Um, but this one did end up being a pretty rousing success. It's actually the most referenced of all the animated Disney. So like the animators for Disney borrowed scenes from this for
Yeah.
more subsequent films than any other Disney classic.
That makes sense because I recognized a lot of
Yeah.
specific animal animations from this movie. We'll talk more about it, but there's definitely a lot of at least surface level comparisons to The Lion King with this movie.
Yes.
I see a lot of the DNA of The Lion King in this. I think The Lion King is better in almost every way, but I can see a lot of the sort of skeleton, the bones of that in this, especially the animation. Like, remember towards the end when like Bambi goes to rescue Helene? Is that her name?
Faline, I think.
Baleen. Anyway, and so he's like knocking the
The dogs
he's not
away,
the
yeah.
dogs away. They're very much like the hyena scene in The Lion King. Anyway, so that's interesting. That makes a lot of sense to me. I would applaud them. Let's talk about the animation before we get into the plot. This is a beautifully animated movie. It's the best
Yeah.
thing about it. This
It's
movie is
incredible.
stunning.
Yeah.
Yes, in terms of I'm glad they waited a couple years to really perfect the animal movements because they're spectacular in this. Like when the when the mom is like looking around nervous because she thinks she hears something, like the really quick head movements, they feel very much naturalistic to what how deer move and act, and I find that really really impressive. There's a lot of great like watercolor backdrops. You can kind of see that or they look like watercolor anyway. I don't know exactly what the technique is, but there's some very painterly shots in this movie, and I really like how they're not afraid to get sort of stylized and unrealistic in terms of the lighting and color. For example, there's that duel fight he has with the sort of rival
Yeah.
male deer, and like the color completely shifts to this very high contrast, like colorful highlights versus really dark shadows look
Depending on
where you
who's like winning the fight at the time, yeah.
yes. Oh, it's so
Yeah.
cool. It's
It's
so
really
good.
well done.
And the fire sequence at the end is
Yeah,
just
yeah,
a
when
masterclass.
Bambi goes to Los Angeles, yeah.
Yes, I did. I had that thought as well. Um, Beautiful, stunning animation. I really like the sort of snow effects and things like that for the winter scenes.
Yeah. Oh
This
my
is
God, the sound design for the snow in the winter scenes
mhm,
is perfect. I mean, like they
yeah,
do a really great job when the snow is like falling around him. It sounds it sounds great. I like
yeah,
unreal.
yeah. I would say the technical execution of the animation, the sound design, and the music are easily the best thing about the film. It's absolutely beautiful in all of those categories. The story is my least favorite aspect of this movie, and I'm gonna discount. I'm gonna push Fantasia to the side for a moment because it's not really one whole story. This is the weakest of the theatrical films so far, in my opinion. I think Snow White and Pinocchio are the two best, and then Dumbo's kind of close behind that. I think this story for Bambi is kind of thin,
Yeah.
and I have some problems with the implications. We'll talk about it. But in terms of the technical execution, this movie is absolutely stunning.
Yeah, this one on IMDb, I think, ranks somewhere between Pinocchio and Dumbo. I think it's slightly higher than Dumbo, slightly lower than Pinocchio on IMDb. So,
I like Dumbo better. I think Dumbo has a better story.
yeah, I think I would agree with you on that. This one, and I read the book. It like I've been doing for a lot of these, been trying to incorporate a lot of the the material from that for this. The book,
Yeah, we gotta
I did not.
we
I
gotta
did not
learn
read
how
it.
Disney ruined culture by making things too cute.
Yes,
So
exactly. I did not particularly care for the book. I'm not. I it was kind of it was very similar to the movie in story, in terms of it kind of being meandering and a little bit just sort of directionless. I think is one of the issues that I have with it. And I understand that we're sort of following Bambi's life as he grows up in the woods in both.
yeah.
The book is far more European, and by that I mean cynical and depressing, and um, like
Yeah,
unwilling to allow for the possibility of redemption or happiness in any aspect. And I
So what you're
listened.
saying is that they've been like that for a while. That's
Yes,
what I'm
yeah.
hearing.
People have been. I listen. People have been screaming about this for the Europeans have been like this for a while, and there are a particular subset of Americans who like to scream about how we should all be more European. And to that, I say, fuck off, please, kindly
Yeah.
go
So
back, go away.
Bambi: A Life in the Woods by Felix Salten. Is that how you
Yes.
say it? Published in 1923.
Yeah,
So
evidently, so Felix Sultan, like the bare minimum background information needed for this is that Felix Sultan was Jewish. He was sort of like an upper class aristocratic Jew in Austrian society, and in some ways, it's very well widely accepted that this book is sort of like a metaphor
an
for
allegory, yeah.
an allegory for how upper class Austrian aristocratic Jews are not accepted by other upper class, normal upper class aristocratic Austrians, you could say. I had a very difficult time grasping on to any of that because there is also a widely accepted idea that he didn't really want to do any didactic writing. He wasn't trying to present an allegory or anything
This is
like
an
that.
Animal Farm, essentially.
Yeah, this is an
Yeah.
Animal Farm. This is basically just a depiction of how a deer lives in the woods. And I don't think it can be both. I think you have to pick one or the other. And I think that it is stronger if you look at it from in that second
Just a
perspective
general coming of age, like life cycle
of a deer. Yeah,
story.
it's a
Yeah.
stronger story if you look at it from that perspective. Um, Apparently the original English translation was done by a guy who barely spoke Austrian German, so the original English version did not reflect this element. It was still a
Yeah.
huge success in the West, in American.
Yeah, it was very popular.
Yeah.
Hence why you mentioned earlier that Disney was really trying to get a hit on his hands with this one, and so he picked a very popular book.
Yes,
And
one that
in
he
the
very
original,
much liked. Which
yeah,
this is another thing that I find interesting about this is that even when the translation sort of shied away from the plight of the Austrian Jews, it was very much like widely spread around that it actually was an allegory for that, and this being the first movie that Disney decided to drop after the U.S. entered World War II,
mhm,
it is kind of funny that how it flies in the face of the general idea that Walt Disney was some sort of Nazi sympathizer. The book
yeah,
was banned by Nazis in Germany
yeah.
because of how Jewish it was, essentially.
So here's a question for you, because I have not read the book. I have seen in the Wikipedia article in the the description of the book that it was widely seen as a sort of parable allegory for the Jews in Europe at the time. But I've seen the movie, and assuming it's broadly similar, who like are the deer are the Jews? Is that the idea? Who are the
Yeah,
Germans? Who
yeah,
are
I
the
think
Austrians?
the Austrians. I'm pretty sure they're supposed to be the hunters,
That's
which is bizarre.
yeah,
But
okay, so let's
I don't think I'm not 100% sure he intended that to be.
yeah, let's set aside whether let's assume he didn't actually intend it. A lot of people seem to believe that that's the case.
Yes.
So what do they think is going on in this movie? Like
Well,
they
according to the communist essayist who wrote the introduction to the audiobook version that I listened to, the deer and the woodland creatures represent all minority populations who are born just to be killed.
okay. That's okay, you know what? That seems like a good segue to talking about talking animal movies and
Yes.
the strengths and pitfalls of using them allegorically, you could say. Now, talking animal movies, some of them are among my favorite movies of all time, like Finding Nemo and The Lion King, I think are incredible movies. This is not one of the better talking animal movies, in my opinion, because I have trouble with the implications. Now, one of the pitfalls with using talking animals, like, okay, so here's the thing about talking animal movies, is that they're about people, right?
Yes.
Fundamentally,
Well, yeah,
right? Because we're
that
anthropomorphizing them, where we're giving them drama and inner, experiences that animals don't have. Rarely are talking animals in these movies actually behaving exactly the way they do naturally. You know what I mean?
oh yeah.
It's a sort of a blend. Different movies will have different balances of, the human-like behavior and the animal-like behavior. But so these are stories about human beings fundamentally. A lot of them I think are smart, like The Lion King, for example, I think is smart to not include any human beings in the story. Because this movie, obviously, the big threat in the story, it's mostly a rather benign tale about growing up and like hanging out with your friends and falling in love and getting married and having kids and all that sort of fun stuff. The only real source of conflict, other than the one duel that Bambi gets into with a rival male for this his love interest, is the hunter. Now, the hunter kills his mother, and the hunter is like the only real antagonist in the story. And like man is encroaching on the woods, and that's bad, right? So you can tell that story, right, about like how hunters how what it's like to be an animal being hunted by humans. But the problem is you're like anthropomorphizing these animals quite a bit, and then the threat is mankind, but you're also presenting the woods as if it's this idyllic utopian thing until human beings come along. And that's my biggest problem with this movie, because by implication the movie is sort of like very kind of naively environmentalist in a really annoying way, I would say,
Yeah.
and kind of a little bit anti-human in one sense, because the only bad aspect of the story are the human beings encroaching on this beautiful utopian idyllic woodland setting.
I'm glad
And
you
I
brought
think
that up.
it gets way worse if you imagine that those are the Austrian German people and all the other animals are minority groups. That just makes it way worse as far as I'm
Well,
concerned.
yeah, I mean, there was in that essay was full of a lot of bullshit. For example, that this movie shies away from the story of life in the woods that was originally told by the author of the book in favor of propping up patriarchal institutions, and the nuclear family and all that kind of shit. Like I don't want to hear any of that crap coming out of this guy's mouth. Like honestly, that was
Yeah.
that was some of the most insane babble I've heard in a while. But I'm glad you brought up the thing about man being the main source of conflict, because I have a couple of things, a couple of little notes about this. So the hunter was originally supposed to appear in the movie, but because like for a man character to shoot the mother of the hero, Disney thought he was going to clearly have to be very cruel and villainous in order for children to accept him, and as the antagonist of the movie. He didn't want to show children or to imply that hunters were evil, so he decided not to show the character at all throughout the movie. And this is a villain, man, from Bambi. I don't know if this is still the case, but for a while he was ranked 20th on AFI's top 100 villains list.
Well, that's retarded. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
But I think I can understand clearly. While Disney is like, okay, well, I don't want to imply that hunting is evil, but the movie kind of does anyway,
Yeah.
by virtue of the fact that the only threat that these animals ever face is mankind encroaching into the wilderness. There are no natural predators for any of these animals. Like, and they already sort of, erase predator prey distinctions. Like when the owl is like looking at chipmunks like he's their friend.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's the stuff like that so we're not really presenting things in the natural way, but there's this very clear dichotomy between the hunter and man specifically. entering the woods, and that's a somber, horrible thing because they're cutting down trees, they're accidentally starting fires, we're shooting Bambi's mother, stuff like that. You kind of do imply that the hunter's evil, and it almost makes it worse that he's this unseen force in some sense. Because if you saw him and he didn't have an evil look on his face and he was just kind of, just being a hunter normally with no malice, it might humanize him a bit more, I think, depending on how you shot it. But I don't know. I think he kind of stumbled into that anyway. By virtue of the fact that that's the only antagonist in the story. And I find that kind of, I don't know, I don't like that very much. I think it's ridiculous to read into this a sort of allegory about minority groups versus majority groups. I think that's even more problematic.
Yeah.
And I really just don't think there's a lot of evidence for that in this. Like, I don't know why it's widely believed that the Bambi story is an allegory for that. Based on your description of the book, it doesn't sound like it's really there either.
I'm not sure why. I tried very hard to sort of like come up with an explanation for why that might be happening, and I just
Yeah.
couldn't really, apart from just the fact that people could not separate the author from his work. I cannot come up with a
Yeah, that's a
solid
big,
reason.
that happens a lot. It's like, well, the author is this minority, so therefore it must be about that. You see that a lot. Topaz Dude asks, don't a pack of dogs try to eat Bambi? Yes, they're the hunter's dogs.
Yeah,
Specifically, yeah. So, like, they're very much
Well,
associated with the
and so the
hunters.
way that plays out in the book, I'm gonna just like throw this in here because it's a striking scene from the book,
Mhm.
but it's a little strange. One of the dogs is hunting a fox, and the fox is sort of, giving it like a race trader rundown. Essentially, it's just like we're brothers. You and I, we are practically cousins or brothers. Why are you working for him? And the dog has this like fanatical sort of speech where he essentially reveals that like all of you are in rebellion against man. Man owns all of us. He owns everything and everyone. But I love him.
What?
And yeah,
What?
yeah,
Okay, that's well, I think Disney was smart to cut that.
yeah.
I'll say that
And
because I
well,
think
they end up like the rest of the animals of the forest end up taunting the dog for his race traitorism so bad that he ends up killing the fox out of rage. Is essentially how that
okay.
scene plays out.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about this broadly, right? Because you have movies like Zootopia, which is really trying to do like a discrimination, racist, sort of classist allegory thing with animals, and that gets really worrying really quickly if you spend any time thinking about it. Like, oh, the distinction between prey and predator, and it's like, well, that's a really bad vehicle for that kind of story. I just think the implications of that you haven't really thought through very hard. Um, I think the better talking animal movies tend to like avoid that sort of thing, like The Lion King, for example. Um,
Here's an interesting thing also that I wanted
yeah.
to raise. Thank you, Wasserman, in the chat. Bambi's brother is his cousin, but yeah, his Bambi. There's another male fawn in the book who's caught by humans after they kill his mother, and they sort of
Mm.
raise him. And he basically comes back and has this like superiority complex with the rest of the animals. Like
Yeah, okay, well, okay, I see the sort of allegory peeking through in the book the more you describe it, and I don't like it. I don't think that's
but I like it.
the
Is that
implications of
something?
that.
Is that something that
Well,
like Jewish people who are raised by
well,
the
that's
others come back to Jewhood and then get murdered? Because so essentially what happens is he trusts the people. His cousin ends up trusting the people. He doesn't want to like eat like a wild animal anymore. He doesn't want to walk around and just eat shit he finds on the ground. He wants to be fed and everything. And then when the
Mhm.
hunters come back, he's like, "Oh no, I know him. Like he's my friend. I'm gonna go and talk to him." And he gets shot and killed, and he has this whole moment where he like bleeds out in gory, vicious detail, like a war novel almost, where he's like, he didn't recognize me. Oh my god! And then he dies, and I don't.
You don't see the implication of that?
I is that. I guess
I don't.
I
I
don't know
see
how
it.
that relates to Jews in Europe. I mean,
It's well.
I
I
guess
mean,
I can kind of see it. Yeah, I guess
I
yeah.
think it's like it feels to me a bit like the author is saying like, oh, you can, think you're one of them, but ultimately when it comes down to it, you're not, and they won't treat you as such. You know what I mean?
Yeah, okay. I see that. Yeah, yeah.
That seems fairly clear, and or at least I don't know. It's not super hard to read that into it, I guess. I don't know. The more you describe it, the more I'm
Yeah,
convinced
yeah, I
that it
guess
is kind of intentional, and I think it's kind of
maybe it is. I didn't I was kind of also like trying to look at, cuz like that makes sense to me, right? Like that happens with, deer who are raised by, people, is like they lose the
yeah.
ability
Well,
to
I mean,
function in the wild, right? Like
mhm,
that happens.
domesticated. Yeah.
And I just kind of looked at
Then
it
like,
like,
oh,
oh,
they'll
yeah.
recognize me, and I mean, I guess that's you can read it both ways, which I suppose is the point, right?
Yeah.
But I can understand what people are reading into it, whether they're right to or not. Certainly, I don't think you can read that sort of thing into this movie very well. Not any sort of specific allegory about minority groups in Europe at the time. But there is definitely a sort of like utopian, idyllic nature versus man
Yeah.
encroaching onto it and corrupting it and destroying it and bringing violence to it. That is very much a part of this. And I don't like that part of the story. I think the general sort of coming of age story, like kids being kids and then growing up and then finding love and then starting a family and facing the general sort of dangers of animal life and the cycle of life, all the circle of life, all that sort of stuff is fine. Good, even maybe a little thin. Like might want a little more meat on the bones, but in general, that part of the story I think is, nice.
Yeah.
There's some obvious connections to the Lion King in that, like when he's born, he's like the new prince of the forest kind of thing, and his dad is they call him the Great Prince, but he might as well just be the king of the forest in some sense. I
Yeah.
really like the way they shoot that character throughout the movie. I mean, shoot, I guess animate would be the better word. There's these great shots of like him in the distance with the sun shining down on him. They're very like noble and regal. Those shots are really cool, and there is that little bit of like it's more like how actual deer are in the wild, like that they're raised by their mothers and the dad is just around protecting them, but he doesn't really come very close.
Yeah.
There's a lot of animals that behave like that. And so it gets that detail right, you know? And I think that whole aspect of the story is pretty good. But then there's just some implications about um, man and its relationship to nature that I don't agree with, I guess you could say. I think part of the reason I had sort of forgotten so much of what happens in this movie is just because it's like it's okay, the story,
Well, it's
technically
kind of
it's
thin,
awesome, but
honestly. Like it,
yeah.
like the story is basically, I mean, the big dramatic moment is when like his mom dies, right? But up until
Mhm.
that point, he's kind of just, exploring his idyllic forest surroundings and having a, grand old time meeting rabbits and skunks and becoming friends and everything. And
Mhm.
then the second half of the movie basically is him as a teenager falling in love and having to, fight off a rapist, as you do, and like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's actually kind of funny, like the idea of like the relationship between man and nature here. So this, I'm gonna have you play a quick little guessing game. Um,
Okay.
there's a story, and don't look this up, but like this is true. I don't want you to find the date. A Missourian poacher was caught illegally killing deer for trophies, and was
Okay.
sentenced by the judge to watch Bambi once a month for a year. What year did that happen?
Okay. So the movie came out in 1942.
Yes,
So, um, I'm gonna guess comically late. I'm going to go with 2013.
2018.
Damn, I was close. That's
You
hilarious.
had it on point there actually. Yeah, no, 2018 a guy was sentenced to watch this movie once a month for a year in order to learn the error of his ways for shooting deer illegally.
But that's let's talk about how bizarre that is, because that, like, I don't understand how a judge could do that. Like, how could think like, oh, you need to go watch Bambi and understand, because the problem is that he shot deer illegally. Like, not that hunting is wrong, right? Unless
Yeah.
that's what the judge thinks.
Well, like, okay, so I had this question when I was watching it too, right? In the scene where Bambi's mom gets shot, I had always grown up hearing that, like, the whole implication is that the hunter is a particularly bad hunter, because you're not supposed to shoot, like, it's illegal in a lot of places from what I understood to shoot does when they're with their fawns. I
Yeah.
was pretty sure that's
I'm pretty sure that's illegal most places,
yeah.
and it was probably illegal a lot of places back then as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that might be what the judge was getting at, essentially. I guess.
I
But
guess. Was
yeah.
that the only? Because Topaz Dude mentions that, it's like, is that the only punishment? Was it like, did he have to pay fines as well?
Yeah, he did. He had to pay some
Okay.
fines and do some community service, and then watch Bambi once a month. Settle down on a Friday night, the first Friday of every month. He doesn't get to go out partying with his friends. He has to watch Bambi. Stupid
Yeah.
court order.
Wasserman in the chat asked Hugh if you remember the rabbit being accepted by swans as their child after his family's killed in the book.
I don't. I was listening to this on my drives in and out of work, and there are things that kind of like I was having a difficult time really latching on to the reader, and the way the prose is read. I think probably was not originally intended to be read aloud. Usually that ends up being a problem for audiobooks, I find. But no, I do not remember that part about the rabbit being accepted by swans. I remember a scene of an owl just like absolutely eviscerating a chipmunk and then eating it whole in front of Bambi. I remember Bambi wondering.
I wish that happened in this.
Yeah, I remember Bambi asking his mom why deer don't kill mice, but cats do. So I also this is another thing that kind of like threw me off, I think, on the allegorical aspects of it. There's a scene where all the deer are hanging out, I guess in like a meadow area, right? And that's sort of like how the movie does it. The meadow is like the gathering point. And then some elk come through. And the elk are like the larger, more majestic cousins of the deer. And all the deer start like looking at them, and like they're overcome with awe, and it's sort of like a jarring thing out of some regular kind of boring reading. The voice actor for the audiobook just starts saying, like, Bambi and all of his friends and all of his relatives and all the other deer start going, bow, oh, wow, because they're overcome, like making noises like that, because they're overcome with like awe at the size of the elk who are walking through the clearing. And I was just like, is this like, what is this what Jews do in private? Like they do this on their own? Well, I don't understand. What does this mean?
Well, then the question is, who are the elk?
Yeah, who are the elk supposed to be?
Yeah, see, like, that's why you end up saying things you don't intend to say if you start going down the allegory path and you're not very, very careful about it, especially if you're using animals as a vehicle for it. And so I can believe he didn't actually intend to be super deliberate in that regard, and just wanted to, but like it's a tricky thing, anthropomorphizing animals, because you can get into some weird, there's some pitfalls if you don't think about it too hard. And so, yeah, I don't, what did he mean by that? If it becomes the question.
When I was confused too, because I'm like, do deer do that? Is that something that they do when they see elk?
I don't know.
I don't know
Well, it's
enough
been
about
pointed
deer.
out in the chat that deer do kill and eat mice in real life, though. So saying that they don't in the book is like,
Yeah,
you know,
it's strange. It's very strange.
it's I don't quite under. So it sounds like there's maybe a bit more evidence of the sort of allegorical interpretation in the book, whether he intended it or not. Certainly, there is more things that seem to fit that pattern than there are in this movie. Whether
Yeah.
but there seems to be plenty that contradict it in the book as well. In this, the relationship between all the animals is like the owl is not eating chipmunks whole in front of the deer, for
In
example.
order to intimidate them, yeah, that's his
Yeah,
plan.
all the animals get along except for that one rival rapist deer at one point. They're
Yeah.
all just sort of friends, and they all kind of. It's a little bit like the Lion King that all the little cutesy animals of the forest come to see the new prince who's just been born. Um, that would be Bambi, of course. So they all come to visit and like marvel. Oh wow, he's so beautiful and he's so cute and all that sort of stuff. And I let's talk about it because that's basically where the story starts. Thumper, I like young Thumper a lot in this movie. He's probably my favorite part of the whole movie. I like him coming up to Bambi. Bambi's trying to walk, and he goes, "It's a little wobbly, isn't he?" And then his mother scolds him for making fun of Bambi, and he's like, "Well, he is."
Yeah. The character of
That's sort of
Thumper is a lot. I like the character of Thumper a lot.
yeah.
And actually, apparently, almost didn't happen. The kid who auditioned, they casting director originally like sent him home because
Mhm.
they thought he couldn't act, but they overheard the recordings, or some of the Disney animators overheard the recordings, and were like, no, 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 bring that kid back in. We want that, and they built the
It feel
character out
it
for
feels
him.
very natural, like a child. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? Like yeah, I think that sort of vocal performance is really good. While we're on the subject of the vocal and acting performances, we're still at the point in Disney's history where to this day they do not credit the voice actors
oh,
in the film. Remember, we mentioned that
yeah,
in previous
that's
movies,
right.
but Bambi is yet another of these classic 2D animated movies. If you watch it on Disney Plus, there is no credit for the voice actors. They didn't credit them originally. I think the thought process was back in the day. They just wanted the characters to be the characters and didn't want people to think about, especially kids, about an actor performing them. They
Yeah,
still kind of take that pretty seriously at the parks today. You know what I mean? They want to present this sort of cohesive experience for the kids, but also I feel like you can just credit them in the credits of the movie because kids aren't paying attention to that anyway. I mean, you're
yeah,
crediting the animators, so like all the animators get credits at the beginning of Bambi. No voice acting credits though. That's kind of a shame, I think.
yeah.
I wonder. So as we go through these movies, we'll see when they eventually start doing that because I know they definitely start doing that by the '90s, but yeah. That's odd. So the cast is available on IMDb to check out. No one I recognize by name, but give them some
Yeah,
love.
yeah.
Anyway,
One of them,
yeah,
Thumper's still alive. He's 90 now.
oh, is he really? Wow,
Yeah,
that's interesting.
he's one of. I think he's one of like the only four of the cast who's still kicking. So, granted, there's not a lot of dialogue. I think there's something like a total of 1,000 lines of dialogue throughout the whole movie. It's a very visual kind of thing, and
Yes,
driven a lot more by the music.
yes, and I love the music in this movie. These early, 1930s, 40s Disney movies have this really great, very lush orchestral style. Like there's that choir sound that he really likes in these early movies. It's just so lush and rich and vibrant. The very first thing we see after the opening credits is this great sort of pan tracking shot, if you will, across the woods, and they really nail the sort of parallax effect of like different layers moving at different speeds. It's
Yeah,
very impressive for the time. I mean, it still looks really nice today. It's I this looks way better than most 3D animated movies I've seen.
yeah,
It really holds up. I really like it. It's very charming. It's very impressive, and just the colors and the way it's painted is just incredibly rich. So we're sort of panning across the woods, and then we follow an owl, and the tracking shot speeds up to keep up with the owl, who lands in a tree, and then we're playing really nice music and watching all the cutesy animals wake up. Classic old school Disney cute animal stuff. And then someone hears word that a new prince has been born. So Thumper tells the owls and all the other critters.
They play it a little for comedy. The owl's trying to go to sleep, and all the rest of the forest is waking up and bothering him, and he's pissed off
Because
about it.
he's a grumpy curmudgeon old man type, and of course he's nocturnal, so he's sleeping during the day, and he's getting annoyed at everyone else for making a whole bunch of ruckus. So that's fun. And then we go to visit Bambi, and his mother and Bambi are in this little thicket, and he's sleeping. He's not talking at any point at this early in the movie, and all the other little animals are like looking at him. I love the owl like getting all up in his face and scaring him. Like there's just a lot of really cute stuff, and I don't mean that as a pejorative. It's really charming, like the way they react to the newborn Bambi and stuff like that. It's all very nice. Thumper is sort of making fun of him for being wobbly as he tries to take his first steps. He gets scolded for it. He gets scolded by his mom a lot in the movie. It's pretty funny. And then as we're drifting away from that scene, we drift up to the shot of the like what they call the great prince of the forest, which would be Bambi's dad, the oldest deer. He's lived longer than any of the other deer, so he's old and wise, and he's got great big antlers. And the way the sun's shining on him up on that rock, kind of looking over everything, it's awesome. It's really, really cool. I really like it. Is it the next thing we do? No, because speaking of the music really quick, it's not what happens next in the movie, but I really I think probably the best song in the whole movie is the April Showers
I was
song.
gonna say the same. Yeah, I was about to guess.
Oh,
yeah.
It's so good. It's so catchy. I love it. If you haven't heard that song in a while, either, check out the movie or just go watch the Little April Showers song from this movie. It's great. It's great, and we sort of cycle through the seasons over the course of the movie, and this is obviously the late spring section of the movie, but it's just such a lovely song. I love the way the music sort of builds and changes, especially because a storm, like it starts off just normal rain, and the music is very pleasant, but then it gets pretty thunderous and dark and stormy and all that sort of thing, and Bambi's scared of the lightning and everything. It reminds me of my dog, honestly.
Yeah.
My dog is very, very terrified of thunder and lightning. I try to tell him, I'm like, it's gonna be okay, man. You've survived it several times before. But he won't listen. And it reminded me of that. So but I really like the sort of arc of the music through that section, the way it gets more intense and more dissonant and then comes back into the chorus. It's just really, really good text painting, if you will.
Yes.
Like what I really like about these early Disney movies, this is something they stopped doing eventually, but the technique that is often called Mickey Mousing, where the music and the action of the character on screen match perfectly. Like synchronized musical notes with the raindrops falling, or certain of like Bandy's steps and movements, and like the speed at which he's walking awkwardly in the music, trying to rush to catch up with him and stuff like that. They did that a lot in these old movies, and I really like it. I think it's kind of gone out of style, but I think it should come back because it's fun. It's very cute, and it really it makes it, because they don't do it for everything, but it really makes it feel like the music and the picture are synchronized together, like they're one cohesive thing when you do that from time to time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It would feel like he was very much creating these sort of animated symphonies, I think you could probably call them.
Yeah.
Like, he was doing a lot of that. That's why so it's interesting to think about too. Like his two biggest passion projects that he did in these early years were Bambi and Fantasia. And I think Bambi takes a lot of that sort of mixing classical music with animation from Fantasia, maybe a little bit to the detriment of the story. Contributing to the thinness of the plot, probably, I would say. But he does a really good job of going through the life cycle of Bambi with
and the woods itself, and the seasons and everything.
And the seasons with the classical music, and it's a really impressive thing. Yeah, it was nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards, almost all for sound and music. I think it was best
Yeah.
score and best sound design. So
Yeah, I think it really deserves it. I think the music is great. I love this style of music too. Like you don't hear it in anything anymore.
yeah,
There's some things that will incorporate a more orchestral classical sound, but there's a certain kind of like small orchestra that's being used here, and the choir. The choir is the thing that anytime I watch one of these old, like I wonder, we'll go through them. I'm kind of curious when they stop. But like from Snow White through this, they have that sort of choir sound, and it's really nice. And there's really nothing like it anymore, and so it has a very distinctive feel, very nostalgic for me. I like it a lot. And so yeah, we get little Bambi walking around, being cute, like
learning
learning
words.
things and learning words like bird. The scene where he learns bird is really funny.
Yeah,
I like all the other kids kind of like making fun of him for like, because he sees a bird and he learns how to say bird, and it takes him a while to learn how to say the D at the end of bird. And then he sees a butterfly and he thinks that's a bird too. Stuff like that. It's just cute
it's
and
so
fun.
yeah. The way that it connects is really good too, right? Because he sees the birds and he sees they're flying. Bird. He sees a butterfly. He goes, oh, that's a bird. And so Thumper has to correct him. No, that's a butterfly. And then he sees a flower that looks like a butterfly.
Mm.
And so
Thinks
thinks
that's
that's
a
a
butterfly.
butterfly. So he says that's a flower. And then the skunk pops out of the flower patch and he thinks the skunk is a flower.
Yeah,
It's a classic bit, We're
it's
really
good.
we've really hit every nail on the head for this. Yeah, we had like this baby deer wandering around. I like this scene a lot. This is
Yeah,
one of my
it's one of the
favorite ones.
best parts. I agree. And but then the skunk pops out of the flowers. The skunk weirds me out. I'm gonna say
A
it.
little bit, yeah. Is
The
that because
energy
you're
of
weirded out by trans people, Jamie? Is that the
it's funny. I had a similar joke when I was watching it with my girlfriend last night, because I could have sworn the skunk was a girl in the beginning of the movie, based on everything about it.
its
And
name
then
is
later
Flower?
when
Yeah, later. Hey, fellas. It's like, oh
like,
Jesus.
oh, what happened to you? Like I definitely had that thought, because everything about its energy, and like it has like Flower has like crazy long eyelashes too, and it's like he can call me whatever he wants. I'm just like, oh, that's a guy. Oh, okay. I did not see that coming. I'll say that. And Flower talks really slowly too. It's strange.
Yeah.
He's like, it's like, it's okay. He can call me Flower
If he
if he
wants
wants.
to. Yeah,
I
there's
don't mind. I'm just like, oh my God, get on with it, Flower, you weirdo. Um, I thought Flower is a strange character, because then later he shows up. What's up, fellas? It's like, oh, jeez, what happened to you, Flower? So then the next thing after meeting Flower, learning a few words, getting a feel for the different animals in the woods, and he meets some possums and they're hanging upside down, and then he turns his head upside down to look at them. Fun, cute visual stuff like that. Then we get the Little April Showers song, the best in the whole movie. That's about 15 to 16 minutes into the movie, in case you're curious. And then now it's time to go to the meadow. This is after the rain, and the mother is taking him to the meadow, and he's learning a little bit about, like, oh, the meadow, Thumper told me that there are other deer in the woods. And he's like, why don't we ever see them? She's like, don't worry, you will. And so they go to the meadow, presumably to meet other deer and all that sort of stuff. But first we have the sequence of her like reprimanding him for trying to run out into the open, scolding him, telling him that, like, oh, he has to be careful, because when you're out in the open meadow, things are very dangerous. So she has to go out. And I just really like the animation for how
yeah.
she's like walking cautiously into the meadow. Like it's just very naturalistic. The animators really understood sort of the movement and behavior of deer and captured it very well, especially for the time period. It's just very impressive. The way it like whips its head around really quickly and everything.
I like when I lived in Maryland, there used to be a lot of deer walking through my backyard, right? And I was just like, wow, that I recognize that shit. Like that looks exactly like what they do.
Yeah,
That is insane. Well, they spent a
Very
lot of time.
impressive.
Like the main delays that happened with this movie happened because the animators needed more time to try to get the naturalistic movement of the animals correct.
Yeah.
So I'm
And it
glad
paid
that he
off for them.
decided not to
Yeah.
rush that rush this immediately after Snow White, and to kind of give them some time to really study it, because it pays off. It's great.
It's not just the deer too. All the animals are particularly well executed, I would say. We had it on the screen in the beginning of the stream, but like there's a lot of fun photos you can find of Walt Disney like feeding deer and like sketching them like while right next to them. It's fun stuff. So they go out into the meadow, and then once the coast is clear, they start to see other deer and other animals. Bambi's running around. He runs into Thumper, who's like, hey, we're eating the pink flowers out of
The clover.
the, the clover. And his mom's like, hey, what did your father tell you? And it's like, you gotta eat the greens too. He has some little rhyme about it, but I don't remember exactly what he says.
Yeah, like
Just classic kid stuff, being picky eaters and stuff like that.
the
You
greens
know,
help you grow big ears and feet, but they sure are awful stuff to eat. I
I
added
made
that last part myself. Yeah, it's like
a
it's
yeah,
charming.
it's just
It's a
yeah,
there's something I don't know, man. There's something really nice and like nostalgic about it that kind of
yes.
hits.
Well, there's something very sort of fundamental about what this story is about. If you exclude the whole bit of like the sort of environmental sort of themes, it's really just about growing up and being a kid and, coming of age. Like, there's all the classic kid stuff is here. Like, like learning how to walk for the first time and like learning words and not really understanding what they mean and having to be told what's dangerous and what isn't and making other friends in the woods and then coming across like a girl for the first time and being scared and wanting to hide behind your mother. Like it's just like because that's the scene we're about to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
to.
yeah.
And like being a picky eater and all that sort of stuff. It's all just like classic kids stuff, universal, if you will. And so he meets the girl deer and he's like terrified of her and he's like hiding behind his mom and his mom's like, "Oh, you're not afraid, are you?" And he's like has to like puff out his chest a little bit. He's like, "No." And then they start chasing each other and running around. Then they see other deer in the meadow
The
and they're
teenagers, yeah, they're all
yeah,
running around playing football and
essentially they're prancing around. And of course, Bambi sees them and wants to immediately imitate them. And so like he sees two of them like getting into like a wrestling sort of fighting match sort of thing, and then he starts doing that to the girl deer. It's just like, I don't know, classic stuff.
yeah,
He's like it just understands the behavior of children. You know what I mean? Like I feel like this is just you don't see a lot of this sort of thing anymore. I don't know. There's
yeah,
something very charming about it. And it's just kind of all this stuff is maybe a little thin, but it's simple and universal and like, it's just about a kid growing up. That's basically what Bambi's about in a
yeah.
lot of
It's
ways.
like I mean, it's the format of like one of the is it Bildungsroman, those like coming of age novels that don't really have a story. It's just tracing a life. Like it's the format of that essentially.
Yeah.
That we're gonna go through all of his first his big firsts.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
and I don't usually find those very appealing because like I don't know, like they don't stick with me the way that like a more self-contained
Yeah.
drama driven story does, but I can appreciate why this is so beloved and why it works.
Mhm.
So
It's
yeah,
certainly like an enjoyable watch. I don't think it goes nearly as deep as something like The Lion King
yeah,
does. I just think it's just a little shallower. It's nice to watch and it's an enjoyable, charming experience, but I don't feel like anything about it particularly digs deep or sticks with me. Like I think I had seen this movie all the way through, but watching it again, I had forgotten a lot of it because it just wasn't incredibly impactful. Like little details, right? Like Thumper being like a little wobbly, isn't he? And like at one point when the owl's describing what it's like to fall in love, and he's like walking around in a circle while his head's always facing forward. There's like
yeah,
little details like that I remembered. Obviously, I remember the scene of his mother getting shot because that's pretty iconic in some ways. Um, the little details, but overall, because the story, I think part of the reason it doesn't maybe stick as much as others is because a lot of it feels kind of disconnected. It's just little vignettes across someone's life
Yeah.
of all, like you said, all of his first big formative experiences, which don't always really have a whole lot to do with each other, except that they involve some of the same characters. There's not necessarily one big theme or conflict uniting it all.
Yeah, pretty
So
much. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, like the big conflict is that like man keeps showing back up with his guns and his
yeah, but
his
even
bombs and his bombs and
even
his
that
guns.
only happens 2 or 3 times in the movie. You know what I mean? Most of the movie doesn't have that in it at all. There's, initially when they almost get shot, there's when she does get shot, and then the final conflict with the fire and the hunting dogs and everything. But most of the movie is just sort of like, oh, kids being kids, teenagers being teenagers, that sort of thing. So while they're out in the meadow and everything, eventually the great prince of the woods arrives, and everyone kind of stops in their tracks to like show him uh,
Yeah.
deference and respect. And Bambi's like, "Who's that?" It's like, "Oh, he's described as a great prince of the woods. He's the oldest and wisest of all the deer. He's lived longer than everyone else." I think someone made a joke in the chat earlier that he must be like at most like 15 years old.
Yeah,
Kind of
something
funny.
like.
Yeah, and but he's the wise old king sort of deal. And then he's kind of walking up the hill in the woods on his own, and he sees a bunch of birds flying away from something, and he immediately suspects danger, so he comes running down back to the meadow to tell everyone that, hey, we got to get out of here. And as everyone's fleeing in a big panic, we do this really interesting stylistic thing. I really like how this movie will take some of these tenser moments and use them as an opportunity to do really stylized things. I can't take any screenshots because Disney Plus doesn't really like it when you do that sort of thing. But like as the deer are running away, they sort of lose any specific detail and they become like one solid block of color
Yeah,
that
very
sort of
wildebeest
changes.
coded in that.
Yeah, a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, like the ones that were meant to pay it, it's a really interesting choice because the ones we're meant to pay attention to in the chaos, like Bambi's mother and Bambi, they still have all the different shading of the under part that's lighter and then, like the different colors. And Bambi has spots. But some of the other deer that were like background chaotic deer running away are all like solid colors in a sort of stylized, unrealistic way as well. I think there are some birds as they fly by, they don't even have features. They're just kind of silhouettes, stuff like that,
Yeah.
where we're kind of zeroing in. Like there's all this chaotic movement, but there's not so much detail that your eyes don't know where to look and what to focus on. I like that sort of thing a lot. It kind of shows the power of animation and what you can do with it that you just can't if you're going for photorealism with everything. Disney, pay attention.
Maybe take some notes. I don't know. Go and rewatch. Yeah, another thing that they did a lot of in this movie, Disney, modern Disney, if you're watching, is they cut a lot of things that weren't working. Like a lot of vignettes that they were like, maybe we can just have this be an hour and 10 minutes. Maybe we don't need all this
Yeah,
extra shit.
yeah. An hour and 10 minutes for something like this is like the perfect length.
Yeah.
It's nice because if this was an hour 40 minutes, it would start to get kind of boring because it's just sort of vignette after vignette for a lot of it, and just cutesy animals and nice pretty scenery. Like keep it short, and then you can justify something like that. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, just like the animation style is not afraid to get really stylized if we're really depicting something. Like I'm looking through this scene of the deer jumping around and Bambi looking for his mother. One of the deers that jumps by is navy blue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's like browns and orange, and there's one that's just like a navy bluish purple. Like why? Because I don't know, it's stylistic and fun, you know? And I like that sort of thing. We don't really do that a whole lot anymore. The animation is not afraid to get kind of surreal and abstract in certain moments. The big example that I've already mentioned is when he gets into that duel later on. I
Yeah.
I love the way that is. I'm tempted to say shot. The way that's animated. It's really, really nice. So eventually He loses his mother in the chaos, and then he is saved by the great prince, who he doesn't know yet is his father, but is his father. He rescues him and reunites him with his mom, and then they manage to escape the woods. They escape to the woods. There's a shot that rings out, but no one's hit. So that is the first introduction of the man threat in this movie. I think it's at this point where Bambi's mother tells him like what
Man
that
was in the
was.
forest, yeah.
Man is coming into the forest. And the way it's phrased is very like, see, that's the problem. Man is encroaching on this beautiful, idyllic nature. And I don't like that. I don't like. I would be okay with that as a conflict if nature itself wasn't presented so utopian. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the book does a lot, I think, a lot better of a job of being a little more gray on that. I don't think it's not intending really to make, because because he was a hunter, the guy who wrote it, right? So he
Hmm.
essentially penciled himself in as the villain of the story in a way,
Yeah.
which is kind of funny when you think about it. But um, it does a lot to sort of like, because Bambi's cousin is saved by humans who then don't recognize him and shoot him, right? But it's like that character is also the author, because the author is the
Yeah.
hunter. So it's a little bit like, all right, like we're not saying it. And yeah, there's also the depictions of the other animals eating each other that Bambi has to like reckon with. There's a lot, there's a lot going on. And the forest is not presented as a perfect idyllic place. It gets a little messy sometimes, because at certain points I'm like, well, I mean, I don't know why I don't know why these two animals are getting along. Like
Yeah.
why are these two
Yeah.
friends if you're trying to be realistic about it? But whatever. It's anthropomorphized animals. I'm not gonna, I don't think you thought it through that. You clearly didn't want me to think about it that hard, right?
Yeah.
But then, yeah, this movie really does kind of hit the environmentalism, the idealized environmentalism a little bit.
Naive
Yeah,
vision of nature. Like, and it would be, like I said, it would be fine because most of these animals are not predators. Um, but when it does show the owl kind of like getting along with chipmunks and mice and squirrels and stuff like that, I'm just like, oh, okay, so we're not doing that. We're presenting nature as a sort of utopian thing where everybody just gets along. So what's the conflict going to be? It's man encroaching on it. I don't like it. I think if you had a more realistic depiction of the natural world, like predators were a threat, for example, I wouldn't have as big a problem with man also being a threat. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Because you're
it'd be a little.
because obviously, you know, for deer, hunters are a threat, and it's perfectly fine to have a story about mankind, encroaching on nature, because obviously it happens, and obviously it happens in ways that I wouldn't be a fan of. You know what I mean? Like the guy who's illegally poaching like female deer when you're not supposed to do that, all that sorts of stuff. But when it's so kind of black and white as it is in this movie, it starts to imply things that I don't think I like very much.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from on that. Dr. Diddler is saying that he's seen people take this movie as a proof of concept and use it as a cudgel for why you shouldn't be eating meat. Yeah, I've seen that.
Well,
I've seen
that's
that
the
before
thing,
as
right?
well. Yeah. Uh,
It's like, well, okay, here's the thing, like, a deer aren't like this. Deer don't have these complex inner lives as they do in Bambi.
yeah,
Deer are a little stupid as well. So like if we're gonna you can't really use this movie like that, and I think that's the problem with the way it's been presented, is that people, it feels a little bit like, I mean, it's clear, if you like, you mentioned Walt Disney doesn't actually want to depict the hunter as evil, but he sort of does that by implication to
yeah. Like
people
it's
who
not
just
like,
kind
I
of
mean,
take.
it's not like he succeeded very like really. I mean, the movie was supposed to premiere in Maine because the guy who basically brought him the story he was a filmmaker in Maine. He bought the rights to the book. He realized he couldn't do it, so he was like, "Hey, Walt, why don't you do this instead? And Disney was like, okay, sure, and I'll have the world premiere happen in Maine. And then the state of Maine basically was like, nope, banned because it makes hunters look bad. So it's like you didn't, and like all the hunters in our state will freak out if we play this movie here. Like
Yeah.
it's not gonna fly. So he had to put it in Paloma, California instead. So it's
Hmm.
like you didn't do a great job of not presenting them as evil.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think
I guess you didn't make a cartoonishly evil character the
no,
hunter.
no.
Um,
But
but
there's
yeah,
something, yeah, by not showing it all, you kind of make it this more dehumanizing vision of humanity, if you will. Yeah, because yeah, as hi guy in the chat says, I'm a butcher. There's no shortage of demand for venison, especially this time of the year. Yeah, venison's good.
I was eating I made a pot of venison chili and I was eating it while I was watching this movie.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did.
That sounds pretty funny.
It was fucking good.
Yeah.
It was real fucking good too.
Hmm. You know, it'd be funny. I'm trying to imagine a sort of more real. Not that this movie needs to be realistic, but I'm imagining a more realistic version of Bambi, where like
Where he goes to temple.
overpopulation. No, like no, that's not what I had in mind actually. No, where where like overpopulation of deer is becoming a problem in the woods, and the good guy hunters come help thin out the population and bring balance again. You know, and the deer characters are presented a lot more stupidly than they are in
Oh
this.
God. What are the implications of the allegory then? Oh
Yeah,
no.
well, yeah, we're gonna avoid that like the plague. We're gonna avoid framing it like an allegory if that's the tack we're taking. It's just an interesting balance, and it's something to think about in terms of these talking animal movies. I think it's actually quite a delicate balance to the degree to which you anthropomorphize them and the degree that you don't. That's actually kind of a complicated balance, and I think you can get into trouble by getting that balance wrong, and by how you depict humans in the story in relation to the natural world. Because if you want to do idyllic version of the woods where basically all the animals are people, and so there aren't like strict prey predator relationships, like that's one way of doing it. And so the conflict is more interpersonal, not like animals eating each other. Like that's sort of one way that you could definitely make that work. And they kind of do that, but then they need a big conflict. They want the big fire sequence at the end, for example. And it wouldn't be a Disney movie if someone wasn't an orphan. So we got to kill the mom. And so like how do they do that? Well, they have the hunter do it. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know about that.
Yeah, well, and that's about to happen, right? Because now after the meadows sequence is when we start getting into winter.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's winter and he's discovering snow for the first time, more cute kid stuff. And then
skating with Thumper or trying to skate with
yeah,
Thumper.
Thumper's trying to help him stand up, but he has a hard time doing it because he has tiny, thin legs and no real surface area to like maintain balance on the ice with. But they're having fun, they're goofing around, doing kid stuff, crashing into the snowbanks and all sorts of fun stuff like that. And then they find a Flower who is hibernating and has like really grown out hair. Like that's kind of a Flower weirds me out. I'm not gonna lie. Basically every scene of Flower, I'm just like, I don't think I like you very much. But he's like, "Is it spring yet?" And they're like, "No." He's like, "Are you hibernating?" It's like, "Yeah, why?" And then I can't remember what he says. You
Basically,
remember
just
what
says "well, good night," and then
Yeah.
goes back to sleep, and then he's out of the movie until out of the movie until the great struggle to retain Sigma status comes along later.
Yeah, Dr. Diddler mentions one of the other big dangers with making anthropomorphized animal movies now is furries, sexualizing them. Yep, that's the other danger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're out
Look,
there.
listen, I love The Lion King. I think it's a great movie. I think that "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" scene did something to some percentage of the audience,
Yeah,
and
triggered. It triggered a genetic disorder, you could say.
I think I think something happened there that wasn't supposed to happen, but here we
You
are.
know, it's a combination of like the 90s were sort of like radiation for, for furries because you had that, you had Lola Bunny. You were just
Yeah,
being blasted in every. It was like walking through Chernobyl.
yeah.
Some of us made it out unscathed, and others,
Some of us, yeah.
yeah, others
We lost.
are now cancerous. And
Uh, yeah, yeah.
YMS
That,
has entered the chat.
yeah. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Well. So after the skunk continues to hibernate, even though, at least according to someone in chat, skunks don't hibernate. I'm going to take your word on that. Um,
I actually did ask that while I was watching. I was watching the movie. So Nikki was like, do skunks do that?" And she was like, I don't know." Okay, sure. I mean,
Winter
whatever.
comes. Winter comes, and I love the sort of blizzard animations. They look incredible. The way they mix like the sort of like I don't know. So there's like a general sort of misty fogginess, and then there's the snowflakes themselves. But then as wind hits a certain like section of snow, like over the top of like a snowbank or around a tree or something like that, there's like a brighter, more detailed little animation of little gusts, little flurries that come out. It's just a really nice layering of different, I guess, resolutions of snow effect,
Yeah,
Like,
but
and the way they all combined together make for a really, really nice effect. I like how kind of hard it is to see them through these snow drifts. You know what I mean?
yeah, I think one of the reasons that this movie is referenced in so many different subsequent projects is because of how difficult it was to get that. Um, I think it was like at the time it was the most complex of all the animated movies that he had done, with at
That
like
makes sense.
all those different layers, and like basically to this day it's like the reference point for making that
Yeah.
work, you know.
Well,
And
it looks absolutely stunning. It looks great.
yeah, they borrowed a lot, not from this sequence, but they did borrow a lot from this movie, Pocahontas and the Colors of the Wind as well.
Mm,
See, like I think they replace, Bambi at one point, just her running through instead.
interesting.
Yeah,
I haven't seen Pocahontas in a long time, so
well, we'll get there. Talk
we
about
will.
presenting something as idealized.
Well, yeah, yeah, we'll talk about it. So, uh, now it's like we're getting the first little bits of springtime. They've been surviving on tree bark for a while now, and so there's finally a tiny little bit of green grass poking through some of the melting snow, and so they rush out to the meadow to go eat some of that, as you might. And then, oh no, danger! They run away, and as they're fleeing, Bambi's mom tells him like, "Keep running, don't look back, keep running." And so he runs and he runs and he runs, and the shot rings out, but he keeps running. He runs all the way back through the woods, back to the little hole in the thicket where they made their little home. This part's really sad. It is.
Yeah,
It doesn't quite hit like Mufasa's death, but it's in a similar vein.
yeah, it's close, man. I mean, like
And
it is.
it's really hard like when the kid gets all the way back and then he's waiting for the mom to come in. Like we made it, and then she just never comes. Like damn,
Yeah,
that's
that's
rough.
harsh, man. I mean, like there's a
Yeah.
reason that it sticks with people. You know, like
Yep.
it is a hard hitting scene.
Yep. It is a pretty hard hitting scene. It's not easy to watch the poor kid like calling out, and then the snow, and then the snow picks up again, and he's like lost in the blizzard, and he's calling out and he can't find his mom, and then eventually he's found by the great prince deer, who I quite like how he's just kind of always off in the distance, quiet, never really says anything, and then finally he comes face to face with Bambi here, and he says, "Your mother can't be with you anymore," and then he says, "Come with me, son." And that's when you realize, I mean, you can probably piece it together that he's his son by the fact that they keep calling him a prince in the beginning of the movie, but this is the first time Bambi realizes that that's his
It's the first
father.
time he acknowledges his own offspring.
Yeah, and
He's
then
like, I brought
yeah.
the milk. Let's go.
Yeah, but on the subject of like animal behavior and anthropomorphizing animals, that's obviously something, a detail taken from how deer actually behave and how a lot of animals in the wild behave, where the father just kind of hangs around and protects from a distance, is not actually super involved in the rearing of the children. And so that's an interesting detail that they kept in terms of like the deer side of
Yeah,
the
and it's like
character.
it's strange because I don't think the book does as much of that. It's the book is basically like the male deer just sort of lose interest in being with the women, and so they just go off and wander on their own because they've done what they need to do and they're fucking done with it now. And it's presented really strangely and
Yeah,
like
cynically,
yeah
perhaps you could say,
yeah
because that's not because in the wild, that's not exactly how a lot of, I mean, there's that is how certain like reptiles and other birds and stuff like that behave, but for a lot of mammal species, the male will kind of like stick around and just sort of generally protect without like being super involved with
yeah
the children. Like, um, for example, like lions and are kind of a bit more like how they're presented in The Lion King, where they kind of hang out in the area with the kids and the kids kind of play fight with them and stuff like that. But tigers, for example, there's a great sort of nature documentary. I want to say it's on Netflix called like Tigers Spy in the Jungle, where they use cameras mounted on elephants to observe tigers, which are very elusive and dangerous to be around, but they don't mess with elephants, so they were able to get really amazing footage of what how tigers actually behave. And it's a lot like that. The mother raises the children, and then the father just kind of stays in the area and just sort of generally protects them, but doesn't really get involved. And there's a lot of
interesting.
animals like that. And I think deer are kind of like that as well. That's an interesting thing that they kept for this. You know what I mean? And that, because obviously that's not how humans operate, but that is how some animals operate. And so they're walking the line in an interesting way, I would say, in terms of riding the line between the human behavior and the deer behavior.
Yeah.
But I like it that, once the mother is out of the picture, he's like, oh shit, I got to take care of this
Yeah.
kid. And so he comes in and takes care of him. We don't really see a lot of
Yeah, I was
them
about to say. So
together.
the next scene that we have is
Mhm.
teenage Bambi, basically, or young adult Bambi. He's back, and the owl
Wait, I'm
doesn't.
sorry. Really quick before you jump
Oh
into
yeah.
that, what immediately happens after his mother dies and his father comes to take him away is we hard cut from that emotional moment to a la
Oh
la 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 happy time spring song, and it's just like a tonal
yeah, that was a
whiplash.
very hard left turn. Yeah, I was like,
Yeah,
wh-
like you wouldn't
okay.
believe it. Like it'd break
Tonally,
your
this is a
neck.
little
Oh my
fucking
goodness.
little tonal whiplash going on here.
Yeah, it felt a little bit like, don't be sad for too long. We got to get on to cutesy stuff. But I feel like you could have
Let it breathe a little bit. Yeah.
yeah, let it breathe, let the music kind of come in slowly. Like April Showers is a song that kind of slowly builds from like little bleep, loop, raindrop, kind of, I don't know if they're clarinets or some sort of woodwind sound. And then the song kind of builds from there. This one just starts like la 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 la, and it's like right after his mom just died. He was just made an orphan. That's kind of, yeah, it's a hard turn. I don't think it works super well.
And
Anyway,
a shot of like the snow melting and like shit growing would have worked.
something,
Yeah.
yeah, something of the music that was somber evolving into something a bit more pleasant at
Yeah.
first before we go full la 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 happy springtime.
Well, and this is the part that kind of like, and I guess I sort of understand what they were going for, but like the very next time we see Bambi is after this little springtime song. The owl has been woken up again by a bunch of birds who are trying to fuck, and he's not
Hmm.
happy about it. And then Bambi is like scratching his antlers on the tree, and the owl's like, "Who the hell are you?" And he goes, "Don't you recognize me?" And basically goes like, "Oh shit, it's Bambi. I haven't seen you around here forever." Um, where where was he? Is like was he in a different did Did he go
Different
to?
part of the woods. I think he went to go live with his dad
Yeah, he went to live with his
across
dad
the
in a
railroad
different
tracks. Yeah,
forest. Yeah.
yeah. That's the implication. He kind of left this area to go, and then I think the logic is that it's springtime and they come back to their sort of mating grounds. Sort of what's happening there because they all kind of meet in the meadow again.
Yeah. Okay.
I
I guess
think
that.
I think
Yeah.
I think that's the general idea, but there is that sort of like he went to go live with his dad and now he's coming back to his hometown kind of
Yeah.
vibe to it.
I just always kind of because the dad was a presence in the hometown, right? Like he's been
Yeah.
there. He's like the king of the hometown, basically.
He's the
So
king of the woods. It's not really clear because obviously Bambi for his first weeks, maybe even months of life, never really sees any other deer
yeah, that I guess that
until
makes
they go
sense.
to the meadow. So I think it's a big woods.
Yeah.
And he went to go live with his dad somewhere in the distance. And the deer went to Hawaii for the winter. It's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
this
now
is
he's back and he's all grown up now and he's back to his little hometown. Birds are doing their little like courtship dances and singing la 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 songs. The owl's annoyed by all this. He wants them to shut up and so he scares them into stopping, but it doesn't last for very long and they get right back to it. He flies away and then he runs into Bambi, who, like you mentioned, is scratching his antlers on the tree and bothering him. And then we do that fun thing with the tree vibrating. And we cut to his vision, and it looks like there's 8 deer, and then they all kind of form back into one. That's a cool shot. I
yeah.
like that a lot. It's really neat. Then he basically meets his old friends again. He meets Thumper. I don't really like Thumper's teenage voice as much. It's definitely just not as cute as
Yeah.
obviously it's
Well,
going
he's
to be
barely going to
different.
be in it for the rest of it. You know, like
Yeah.
like this is the beginning of the attempt to stay Sigma for the three for our
Yes.
trio of pals.
Yeah.
Because this is where they learn about sex and they're like, "Oh, that nah."
Nah, I'm not gonna become Twitter pated, which is such a funny word that I'd never heard before.
I was like, that
So
has a lot of that word could have a lot of use. We could bring that one back.
we could bring back Twitter pated. It would definitely change its meaning for better or for worse. So yeah, he meets Thumper again. I don't really like Thumper's voice in this, but before you can really get your bearings there, all of a sudden Flower shows up. He's like, "Hey guys,
Hey,
how's it going?
fellas.
Remember me? It's your pal Flower." I still go by that, by the way. And so they're all hanging out, and then the owl starts talking to them about, "Oh, it's springtime, and everyone's going to be getting on." And then
Everybody's getting
uh,
laid, but you three losers.
he's like love's going to come along, and it's going to make you go crazy. And they're like, "Oh, that sounds horrible." Not not
Girls are
me. I'm not.
gross.
Girls are gross. I'm not going to fall in love. That sounds like a nightmare. And then immediately, like one by one,
It
they
just like
all
yeah, it does not
come
last
across
long.
they all come across female versions of their counterparts. First, it's Flower who meets a female skunk, and I quite like his little animation. Well, first of all, her like eyes are poking out of the flowers, which is kind of a nice touch. And then she comes out and then kind of makes sexy eyes at him, and he he
In
like he turns red and gets as stiff as a board and then falls over. Like I like the way the red kind of spreads all the way through
through
his
the
body. The
white
way,
part of the body, yeah.
yeah, the way that's animated is pretty funny. And then he just like looks like he's high as a kite and just tilts backwards and like rattles to the ground. It's pretty funny. And so basically, one by one, they all meet sexy female versions of whatever species they are, and they all fall madly in love
Where
instantly.
Thumper never stood a chance.
it's it's funny because the design of his like female companion is kind of like chubby, and her face looks like she has a beard.
Yeah.
It's like she has so much fur around. It looks like a Santa Claus beard. It's probably not the best design, I would say.
I always thought of it as sort of like the like a fur coat kind of thing, like
I know that's what they're going for. It looks like a beard. It's, there's a lot of shots, especially the ones straight on. It just looks like a beard. I don't know what else to say. But anyway, so she like bats her eyes at him, and then his thumping
Yeah, his
goes
thumping
crazy.
goes fucking crazy. And this is where, so somebody in the chat said Disney probably didn't realize that thumper was the Scottish word for erection. I would say they probably had a pretty good idea. If that didn't come from this scene, I would say that they have a pretty good idea. Because that is very much implied as what's going on here.
Quantum Ranger power. I am not saying that the rabbit isn't sexy enough. I'm saying that it's weird that it looks like she has a beard. All right, that's all
This
I'm
is
saying.
proto Lola Bunny. I mean, this
It
is
is.
yeah.
It is for sure. Um, yes. So they're all falling hopelessly in love, and then, oh no, same thing happens to Bambi. He's the last
Bambi
one.
was the last
Last one to
of the
fall.
Sigmas.
And then this feels very much like the "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" section of The Lion King. You know, he like sees her in the reflection as well. You know, that feels a bit like an echo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then again, getting back to the willingness to get incredibly stylized, we just had a flower like actually turning red after getting a kiss from his skunk lady friend. Then when the same thing happens to Bambi, everything sort of disappears behind him, and now he's in this like heaven of billowing clouds and everything. Like all the trees are giant clouds, and so they're jumping around basically like they're on the moon. You know what I mean? Like there's low gravity, and he's like floating around. He feels light as a feather. All the stuff that the owl said was going to happen, and they're like, "Nuh-uh," and then it happens to him. Such is life. And then he's about to go into like one of the clouds to go after his lady friend, and I guess do the deed. And as they go into the clouds, he's about to go in behind her, and then it like glitches back to the forest when the rival male, looking very, very menacing indeed, shows up to be like, "Nuh-uh, she's mine, bitch." The way it glitches back reminds me of like Into the Spider-Verse, you know?
Yeah, yeah, a little
It's
bit
like
actually.
it's a
Yeah, that's
really
good point.
interesting kind of glitch effect. It's quite fun that you wouldn't really expect in a movie like this. But I like that it's willing to get really kind of
Really like
stylized and
snaps
over
him
the
back
top.
to reality. Yeah, no, that's a
Yeah,
good point.
exactly.
It's really
It goes,
nice.
yeah, it's fun. And we're about to do another really stylized bit of animation. So I quite like that about this movie. It's quite fun. So this guy's no good at all. He's making menacing faces at Bambi like, "Stay away."
Stay away. I'm a cuck
Yeah.
you.
And she's like, "No, I want to be with you." And then he like pushes her away like he's gonna go rape her essentially. She
Yep.
doesn't seem too thrilled about it. And then Bambi, you know, gets all riled up and he goes charging at him. And then the fight scene starts and we go into very, very stylized animation where like most of their bodies are in complete black shadow, and then there's a sort of like rim light of that's like that changes colors at different points of the sequence. Sometimes it's blue, sometimes it's like a yellowy orange, but it looks so awesome. Hold on, I'll see if I can find a picture of it. You talk for a second. I'm gonna find
Yeah,
so we can show
yeah,
the fine people what we're talking about.
it changes color because like you can't really tell the difference between like which animated deer is which because they're quite similar. So in order to give you the idea of who is has the upper hand at any given point in this scrap, they change the background color and they give Bambi the the reds and oranges and the sort of like warm, almost like majestic color, and they give the darker, colder colors to the other
greens
deer,
and
the
blues and
greens and blues and everything, which it's a nice touch. There's a lot of color theory at work in these earlier Disney movies too, and I remember I used to have I don't think it was on the Pocahontas VHS, but it was a separate VHS tape with like Scrooge McDuck or something like that, singing a song about all the different color temperatures and like the emotions that correspond to them traditionally.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like it's a really like they had a lot of scenes from earlier Disney movies kind of flash up in those things, and so it was just a really interesting sort of like crash course on basically like what that color theory, is that color temperature.
Mhm.
And that's always kind of stuck with me. Uh,
Dr. Diddler, yes, I can't quite screenshot in Disney Plus because when I do, it comes out black. It's like many of the streaming services, they're not a big fan of letting you screenshot things. But anyway,
I
Hugh, if he
gotcha.
hasn't already, is about to show a couple of the images on screen. So they're also that footage is also in the trailer that's been playing, but we'll show them specifically because they're quite fun. I think they look really, really cool. They do feel like a little bit of a leftover from Fantasia in a good way. Like where it's very dramatic. It's very stylized. It's very fun.
Yeah, so I got the one up there right now, the where it's like
Hmm.
blues and greens and darks, and
Yeah.
when Bambi starts winning, change to the red and the orange, the bright sort of like warm toned colors,
Yeah.
passion overruling.
And so the fight continues until Bambi knocks this guy down the hill and into the water, and he gives up and walks away. It's not quite a fight to the death because it's a little movie for kids, but and then we get to this great shot that is actually in the intro sequence. I don't know if you wanted to pop back to that for just a hot second, but like where he's looking down the cliff at his defeated foe, and then she comes up next to him, and we got the nice golden sun behind him. It's very painterly, and it kind of it's the first time we've seen Ben be portrayed in the same way that his dad has been portrayed in the first half of the movie. It's fun.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like it.
it'll be
It's
coming
really
around.
stylish. It's really dramatic. It's it's just like some of these shots are just gorgeous to look at. Very, very nice.
There
And
it
the
is.
music
Yeah, it's
that's
coming around. It's a
the mu-
really pretty shot, and I think that's one of the ones that they borrow for Colors of the Wind for
mhm.
Pocahontas, which is
Multiple people have mentioned the Scar versus the Hyenas section. There's
yes,
definitely echoes of that. Yeah.
and Scar
I would,
versus Simba. I mean, when Simba's winning at
yeah.
the end, it's got a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
similar color tone.
Remember who you are, Bambi. Yeah. Google says that you should be able to screenshot if you turn off hardware acceleration on your browser. Something you can try later, I suppose. Yeah, okay, I'll look into that. That would be nice to
To be able
be
to
able
do, yeah.
to be able to screenshot from streaming services. Anyway, this is a really cool sequence, and I like it because it's one of the only sources of conflict in the story that isn't the direct result of man imposing its will on the idyllic forest. It's like, oh, there's actually just conflict within the natural world. That's cool. I'm glad that is being depicted as well.
Jew on Jew
Uh,
violence, yeah.
yeah, what did you mean by this? Anyway, yeah, that's why I
Is this
think
how
it's
Jewish society works?
this is why you shouldn't. Allegories are a dangerous thing, and you should not lean too hard in the direction of allegory. You end up saying things maybe you don't mean to say. Yeah, I definitely don't think that's the way of interpreting the movie. At least the book might be another question. But
This
anyway,
scene happens in the book too. Like it's not,
yeah.
you know.
Does he describe the opponent particularly
Yeah,
as
the
like?
opponent is a named character who,
Oh, okay.
yeah, like who comes back like multiple times. He was in the original version of the movie, or the original edits or cuts or writing
Oh,
drafts.
interesting.
He was a named character, and I think he shows back. We were looking it up. He shows back up in Bambi 2 from
Oh,
2006.
I didn't
This
even know there was a Bambi too, but I guess I
neither
shouldn't be
did I
surprised. There were many
until
of these. um, okay, so after they get it on, you know, and all that sort of fun stuff, he hears something in the middle of the night. He gets up and he goes to the edge of the woods and he sees mankind in the woods, and there's a camp down in the ravine where there's a fire going and all sorts of stuff. And then his dad shows up and he's like, man has entered the woods again. We got to get out of here. And so he goes running back to get Faylene, I guess that's her name.
yeah,
Faylene, but before he can get back to her, she senses that something's wrong, is scared that she doesn't see him, and so she runs away. By the time he gets back to their little camp, she's gone as well. So, oh no, now they're separated, and all the animals are starting to panic because they sense something's going on. There's this really kind of harrowing scene where a quail, or like a group of quail, are on the ground,
Oh
and they're
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
stay here, don't fly away. And one of them is like, no, no, we have to fly. They're gonna find us. We got to get out of here. And she like goes, I assume it's a she, flies away and then gets shot immediately. It's like, damn, that's pretty brutal.
And then they all start freaking out, you know, because
Then they
they're like,
all start running away, and then oh no, the evil dogs, who are presented very evil. See, that's the other thing. The dogs, the way they're depicted, very evil, like showing their teeth constantly, very evil, beady eyes. You know what I mean? They're not just kind of neutral animals
yeah, no,
hunting. You know what I mean? They're
they're race
vicious and
traders, of
cruel.
course. Yeah,
They're race traders. As such, very evil. And then these big pack of hunting dogs are all chasing after Bambi specifically. Actually, no, this is Faline at this point, not Bambi. She gets cornered. She finds herself
she gets
in this,
cornered in the elephant graveyard.
yeah, essentially. And she's up on a ledge, and the dogs are trying to get her, but they can't quite reach her. And then Bambi comes and saves the day and starts knocking into them and like sending them flying um with his antlers and everything. There's a bit of the like this part feels very Lion King too. Some of the animations I think were probably borrowed. Uh, anyway, he's fighting off the dogs and he saves his princess, and that's awesome. Go Bambi, good for you. And then he like goes up the cliff and he knocks the rocks back down after him, and then that that disposes of the dogs. But then he tries to jump across a really, really big like opening between two cliffs, and I can't remember, like there's a shot that happens. Does he get shot?
Yeah, apparently he does. Which
That was a little confusing. Let's
somebody
talk
was
about
talking about earlier about like how good of a shot it is that takes out Bambi's mom. Let's talk about the shot that the guy makes
Bambi
against Bambi, where he's like
Yeah.
leaping across a ravine, and in midair he gets fucking clipped by a
Yeah.
hunter. It's like he doesn't
But
kill
then
him.
we never see the wound. It's not really. I wasn't even quite sure he did get clipped.
Apparently he does. Like if
He
you go
does, because
and
if I'm looking at it slowly, he's flying through the air. It's not the big jump and the fall that hurts him. In midair, he flinches like he just got hit by something.
yeah,
But then it's unclear where the wound was, because he's perfectly fine not too long after this. It doesn't take him too long to sort of recover. So I don't really know what. Yeah,
he needs a pep talk from his dad to get
yeah,
him back up and like yeah.
it gets a little confusing. Yeah, so he manages to escape the dogs. He's jumping across this big crevasse type thing, and the hunter, with an absolutely brilliant shot, manages to hit him.
Gets him in midair and like
Yeah,
like I mean
crazy.
Jesus Christ, that's a shot.
That is quite a shot. Then, the wind spreads fire from an unattended campsite that very quickly starts engulfing the entire woods. So now it's this like huge apocalyptic, cataclysmic event. The fire is spreading through the woods and destroying everything in its path. I guess everything was very dry because like full trees are catching fire instantly. um, which thankfully is not how that works in real life. So he finds himself wounded, injured. It's not really clear to what extent. And his dad comes along. It's like, hey man, we got to get the hell out of here. It's time to buck up. And so then they go running. They're trying to escape the fire. They have to every now and then a tree falls and blocks their path, and they're like, oh, panic! What are we gonna do? And the way it's animated is stunning. Like the fire effects are just incredible.
Yeah.
Very, very fun and stylized. We're doing some of the sort of very dramatic high key lighting that we did in the stag fight not long ago, where like most of their bodies in shadow and stuff like that from time to time. And then a flaming tree is falling on them, but they're caught at the edge of a waterfall, so they have to jump down from the waterfall to save their lives. Where have we seen that before? Besides everything. I wonder what the first to do it was, actually. What was
the first story ever for somebody like that?
Yes.
The
first
we might have to
story,
go pretty far back, honestly, for that one.
I'm
Seems like a
curious about it because it's a very common trope in certain kind of stories. Like, oh no, we're caught at the edge of the waterfall and we need to jump to survive or whatever. It shows up in that new god awful looking Mufasa movie, and
oh
it
lordy.
happens here. It's quite a bit more understandable and believable here. But I'm just kind of curious what the first story to do that is. That's a question for anyone in the chat if they happen to know. If not, I'll Google it later. Anyway, so they're fleeing the fire. They jump down into the waters and they just barely survive. And now they're across a small lake. A lot of the animals are coming up on the other side. They're soaking wet and they're sort of trying to reassess the situation. And Bambi and his Faline are reunited, which is nice. They both lived. They didn't die in the fire. And they look on as the fire rages and burns the whole forest. Cut to some time later, and
Long enough for Faline to pop a couple kids out.
yeah, and like there's a lot of dead trees, but some parts of the forest are growing back. We come back to the owl, who's once again annoyed at all the animals for making too big of a ruckus, as you do. And then it's time. It's just like the opening of the movie. Like there's new princes have been born, and so all the animals gather. And oh my goodness, Faline had twins. Those two were born this time. Two little new Bambis are born, and all the animals are looking on and saying how cute and how adorable. And then we cut to the big wide shot of the great prince, his dad, and Bambi looking on from the cliffside, kind of overseeing everything. And the music swells, this big epic sort of choral orchestral music swell happens, and the end. That's the story of Bambi.
Yeah.
I think as an aesthetic experience, it's incredible.
Yes.
I think it's absolutely stunning. It's beautiful, vibrant, fun, beautiful, all those sorts of fun things. Very dramatic in a visual spectacle sense. Very, very, very impressive animation. Like basically, it's like a whole life of a forest animal in a movie. So there's like all the different seasons and all the different like types of action you can have, like the stag fight and then running away from the giant fire and then the blizzard and all that sort of stuff. Like everything, there's a lot here. It's very as an aesthetic experience, it's like worth your time and worth your money. You know what I mean? You get everything you could ask for in that regard. The story is just kind of thin. It's fine. It's fine. It's about the sort of life cycle of a deer, and growing up and what it's like to be a kid and what it's like to be a teenager and all that sort of fun stuff, and then about how hunting and mankind are evil, and
yeah,
that's the
the
basic story of Bambi. It's I would happily call it good, but
yeah,
I think
it's
there's some
not
things
going
that
to
hold it
make
back
my
from being
list
great.
of like favorites, and probably not even on like the Disney list. Right now, it's still sitting somewhere like towards, out of the ones we've watched, it's above Fantasia, but it's still somewhere towards the bottom. Like
Yeah,
it's not
I
quite.
agree.
Yeah.
I certainly like the story of Dumbo better than this, but this is a um this is a better looking and sounding movie than Dumbo, I would say.
Yeah. Real quick.
No hate on Dumbo though. I like Dumbo.
Yeah,
Dumbo's great.
real quick, by the way. I just want you to appreciate how this is a little bit of a difficult thing to Google. First story to have a character jump off of a waterfall to survive. There is no definitively documented first story. The most widely recognized historical example is the story of Sam Patch, who was a real-life American daredevil who jumped off Niagara Falls in the early 19th century.
No, that's not what I mean.
Would you like to know how Sam Patch died?
By jumping off of Niagara Falls, didn't he?
He jumped off of a different falls. The Genesee River Falls in Rochester, New York. So it's very close, and he froze to death.
Well,
so
unanswered for now, but eventually we'll find out where that trope comes from. Let's see. I swear this owl is my spirit animal. Yeah, I like the owl. I like that he's kind of a grumpy old curmudgeon. He's just like, quiet down all the time. I'm trying to sleep because he's nocturnal and everyone else isn't. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
And I really like the speech where he describes what it's like to become Twitter-pated to the other animals. It's quite fun. He's very expressive in this movie. The dad just walks away like my job here is done. Yeah. So it's like him and Bambi and his dad up on the cliff overseeing, the birth of the kids and everything. And the dad's like, all right, well, I'm out of here. You could take it over from here. You can stand here stoically. You've got that covered. I've taught you everything I know. Um, let's see. So it's Avatar, but good. It's certainly not nearly as egregious in the
Yeah.
anti-human environmentalist garbage that Avatar peddles in. Um,
Yeah, it's not
uh,
quite. It's not
Traffic sin is the
quite
word I was looking for. Yeah,
up
go
to
ahead.
that. Up to that.
No, it's
Level.
certainly not. It's because it feels more like a bit unintentional almost. Like by implication,
Yeah, I
the
think really
message.
like the problem is that this one feels like he just really, really wanted to adapt it, and then he kind of struggled on executing it in a way that because he wanted not to make it that way and just sort of ended up accidentally
Yeah,
making it that way.
it
You
feels
know?
like he wanted cutesy, idyllic animals doing cute things. So you don't get that if you have to deal with the fact that owls eat mice and chipmunks and other birds and stuff like that sometimes. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
you have to ignore that to paint a more idyllic, vision of a happy childhood and all that stuff with relatively free from danger. But then we need some danger, right? And so, well, it's a hunter in the book, so we should probably adapt that part of it. But by making such a sort of utopian vision of what nature is like, and then pitting that against man encroaching on it, you're implying some things. Um, and I don't think it's clear he even really wanted to do that, but he just kind of did it by accident. Because from what I understand, Walt Disney doesn't think hunting is bad, but you'd be forgiven for thinking that the movie thinks that.
Yeah. So someone is saying clearly the theme of the movie is capitalism is bad and racist, and it's funny because most of the critique of this movie as compared to the book is that apparently it props up patriarchal power structures of the mid-century American values and
Why?
society.
By showing dads on screen? Like what are you talking
Bambi
about?
has that's a great question. I don't know why he thinks that. Bambi has twins and a family. In the book, he does not. I think he just sort of goes off and becomes like the old prince that everybody's like, oh wow, look at him. He's the oldest deer in the forest.
But the
Um,
oldest deer in the forest is his dad.
I'm
So
pretty sure his dad dies in the book, and then he ends up becoming that character,
yeah,
like
but you know what I
fulfilling that
mean
role.
though.
Yeah,
Like his dad had kids,
yeah,
but he doesn't. Bambi
yeah.
doesn't have kids in the book.
He has a relationship with his girl, with Faylene, and then they break up because Bambi doesn't know if he loves her anymore, and then he wanders off and becomes like the mysterious old prince.
Oh,
Who's
so
yeah,
the life cycle ends with Bambi. He doesn't reproduce. Essentially, that's what happens in the book.
I don't remember. They do not bring up whether or not he had kids, or they might, and I might have missed it. But it's not like he assumes the role of the protector from on high like he does here,
Yeah.
right? We don't.
hmm
Yeah, it's like
Well,
he.
this is obviously a much better vision of a sort of archetypal, vision of the circle of life and the continuation of the world, if you will, uh, than if he chooses to go become a sort of lonely recluse in the woods. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
In book, Prince is just a name. He's accepted as one. It's just like his dad and it is a distant. So, Wasserman, you've read the book. Do you remember if Bambi has children in the book or not? Let us know
I'm pretty
because
sure there's a sequel called Bambi's Children. So
okay,
he does have kids.
okay, well, okay, fair enough.
They just don't play like I don't think they don't get the treatment like this, right? Where like the
Yeah.
end of the movie comes full circle and we're,
hmm
celebrating his children. The end of the book
Yeah.
is like somebody looking on and saying, "Wow, look at him."
Okay, so yeah, Wasserman says he's just like his dad. He has kids and is a distant mythical figure. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's okay. Yeah, but I quite like the way Bambi ends, and it's a lot like the way The Lion King ends. I think The Lion King is stronger, but it's the same general idea. It's the circle of life, right? So it ends with the birth of the next generation. You know what I mean? Just as it began, and I think that's a really nice way of bringing it full circle. And I think The Lion King drives that theme even better than
Yes.
Bambi does here. But Bambi has it, Bambi has it. It's more than just hunter bad and stuff like that. It's a story of like what it means to be a person in some sense.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that part of the story is quite good, if just like a little surface level.
Basically, yeah. Somebody was saying that it sounds, the summary that I'm giving sounds a little like Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Yeah, in a way, and that would make sense actually. I mean, similar cultural values. German writer writing a story like that. It's a little less religious, I would say, but yeah, it's pretty close. Little coming of age story where he goes through all of these like major life changes. Um, I did not particularly care for it. But
The book, you mean,
yeah,
right?
the book. The movie
Yeah.
I find did I think, better job in a lot of ways of like, and I think I texted you about this, right? Is that after I finished the book and then watched the movie, and heard that, nonsense argument about why the book is, like, superior and Disney has ruined culture by making Bambi cute and cuddly. Um, the common theme seems to be that the original stories are darker and have more of a cynical streak to them, and the
Yeah.
Disney ones don't have that. They kind of eschew that in favor of the more optimistic and hopeful view of life. And I think,
Hopeful, redemptive, aspirational, whatever word you want to use, depending. It kind of depends on the story, but yeah, no, I totally agree. And I just like Pinocchio seems to be the best version of that.
yeah,
Like so in the novel or the serialized original story of Pinocchio, originally he had him like killed horribly, and that's how it ended, and everyone complained, so he brought him back to life to keep telling the story. But obviously that doesn't happen in the Disney version. In the Disney version, it's like instead of just being a hopeless little shit whose life ends tragically because he's a bad person, he actually learns how to be unselfish and become a real boy and redeem himself and save his family, all that sort of stuff. So it's I don't know, I like that way better personally.
yeah,
and I like it's a little light on the story, but I like that Bambi has a sort of positive vision of the sort of the family and the how the sort of family and the cycle of life continues and blah 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 blah. I like, because like it's very simple, but you can look at Bambi and realize that like, oh, Bambi is someone who learns to be sort of like brave and a noble in defense of his family and everything like that.
yeah.
And sort of he takes on the role of the great, wise, respected prince and sort of becomes that. I suppose a little bit like the Lion King, he becomes the good king, if you will. Um, as opposed to, so I suppose if you think all hierarchy and all family is bad, like if you're like a retarded communist who thinks the nuclear family is bad and oppressive and all sorts of crap like that, you would look at this because it isn't subversive of that sort of thing and be like, ugh, it reinforces all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, well, maybe it should, and maybe more things should. um as someone mentioned, there's a super chat. Muggy, thank you very much for the super chat. Says you should have outrageous criticisms at the ready for each movie after every discussion, like patriarch bad. Yeah. So the real problem with Bambi is that it's sexist and none of the female characters have any agency. Boom, checkmate. This movie's sexist and bad now.
Props up the patriarchy. 0 out of 10.
It's that simple. Yeah. Yeah, like Topaz Dude mentions, it's unironically a 13-year-old argument. Like edgy and dark and cynical equals better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tiresome, and any adult who peddles that sort of thing should be laughed at, I would say. It's one thing if a teenager who just wants to rebel at the very cushy life that they've lived, if they have that attitude and they grow out of it, that's one thing. But when
They'll
you
grow
see
out of it
people
once they get Twitter pated and laid. So
when you, when you see like 30, 40-year-old wisecrack hosts peddling that sort of thing, I think you should be a bit more worried about what's happened to that kind of person.
Yeah, Wasserman was saying also that Bambi as a children's book is bizarre, and I wouldn't recommend. Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I don't think it was I don't think it was intended to be a children's book either. There's a lot of like really gory, graphic detail. Talk like when his cousin who gets too acclimated to like hanging out with men gets shot, it talks about like his entrails spilling out and him twitching and like writhing in agony as he realizes that his friend has just killed him, or who he thought was his friend has just killed him. It's just kind of like, yeah, this is definitely, I mean, maybe for Germans, maybe German kids. This is
No,
a children's story
we
in
need to
Austria.
break them out of that. Yeah. Yeah, they, like Disney, if there's a pattern emerging with the adaptations that he does in this area, in this era, I should say, um, they're not cynical.
Yeah.
I would say that's probably their defining trait is that is they're not cynical. You know, it's funny because we talked about it when we talked about Snow White, but it's interesting to know, and this is not something I knew for a long time because it feels like the embodiment of tradition, the original Snow White. When the original Snow White came out, it was kind of coming out in a sea of like cynical, subversive cartoons depictions of Snow White, like the Betty Boop one is Max. Oh God, what's his name? I can't remember the guy who did those, but that's like really weird and strange
And
and
trippy and
subversive
like
and kind
kind
of
of like,
lewd.
yeah.
Yeah, and then this is sort of Snow White was his sort of like return to tradition, if you will, in a sea of that sort of stuff. And it was very, very popular. And so he sort of kept that going. And now, like for us, like that's the old tradition that has been sort of undermined and subverted by a lot of later Disney stuff. And so I would like to see a return to the non-cynical, sort of reductionist, like politically
Politically
tainted.
charged, yeah, like
Yeah,
yeah.
because this is something, honestly, if they released something like this today that is just like kind of thin on story, light on story, but has a lot of great music and animation, and it just
And a
presents a sort of,
positive like a positive spin on the message, yeah, I think they would have a rousing success on their hands.
I think they would too. I think it would be even stronger if they took a sort of timeless folk tale and did it right, so to speak. Uh, you know what I mean? Bambi's a little meandering, but yeah, I think they would have a huge success on their hands if they did that. And if they made something in this sort of classic 2D animated style, oh man, I would go nuts. I love this stuff so much. I think it's great, and I think it's a shame that they don't make things like this anymore. I understand that they're complicated and expensive, but you can do it. Clearly, they did in the past. You could bring it back, and I think you'd have a huge hit on your hands. I think a lot of people are tired of the just generic, samey 3D animated stuff.
Yeah.
I think. And I think what the animated movies that tend to do well these days, they just have really strong stories. That's obviously the most important bit, but they tend to get more unique and experimental in terms of visual style, right? Like the first Spider-Verse movie was a huge hit, in no small part because it was kind of groundbreaking in some sense visually. I really liked uh, uh, what's it called? Puss in Boots 2, The Last Wish. That had a really remarkable and unique visual style that wasn't just the same old generic 3D animated like Illumination or modern Disney crap. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'd
Yeah.
like to see more of that, but especially 2D animation. I'd really, really like to see that make a comeback, and I'm going to probably say that at the end of every single one of these reviews we do
Yeah.
because I can't help it. It's just so good.
Yeah, I think, and one, it would, it's come to the point where it would be pretty much like revolutionary at this point, right? Like it's come back around to the point where everything, all the animated movies are so saturated with the 3D computer generated stuff that you
Hmm.
could just put one of these out, a 2D animated classical thing like this, and it would set itself apart from the pack instantly because nobody else
Yeah.
does it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you still gotta, you gotta put the money behind it and the advertising behind it. You can't run away from it. Like it's like, oh, maybe it's a niche thing we'll try, but not really advertise. You gotta pump money into it, like you gotta do anything to get people's attention these
Yeah.
days. But if you did, I think you'd have a big success on your hands. A couple of people are mentioning something to the effect of like that we're starting to see a little bit of a resurgence of sort of earnestness and sort of like classical storytelling, if you will, or more traditional storytelling instead of like, because at a certain point, if you're the type of person who likes pushing boundaries and subverting things, like eventually you do run out of things to subvert. And I think we're getting towards that point now where it's almost like, what is there left to do really in the subversive, like redefining the art form, like redefining how stories work? Like there's only so much of that you can do before you eventually get to the point where like, oh, it'd actually be pretty unique and subversive these days would be to do something that's completely earnest and non-cynical and a return to a tradition that we've largely forgotten. I think that would really stand apart these days, more than a lot of the same crap we've been getting over and over again.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of thing is especially important for kids. Um, I forget where I saw this, but I saw this recently and talking about children's media, or I guess you could say family media, because it's never just for kids, but or rarely just for kids. But someone was saying that like some people use like, oh, it's made for kids as an excuse for something to be low quality. And some people use, oh, it's made for kids as like a reason that it should be of the utmost quality. And I definitely find myself leaning towards the latter, that like it matters more than any other type of movie that it be good and that the story be imbued with better values essentially. I
Yeah.
think that's more important, not less important. So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
nice
so
to go ahead.
no, I was going to say, like, Eric in the chat had said that he read Stephen King's book, The Stand, at 13. So, Bambi, kids can read stuff like Bambi with like the entrails and all that stuff. And to be clear, I'm not thinking of like 13-year-old kids. I'm thinking of like the target audience for this movie, which is like between what would you say, like 3 and 7, 3 and 9, something like that. Like I'm
Yeah,
talking like
younger, quite
younger
a bit
kids.
younger. Yeah.
Like once you're a teenager, have at it, right? Like go for it. But the Bambi, the original book, is very much not intended for children, and this does a better job at turning it into something that younger kids can appreciate and take something away from. Like it's not all
Hmm.
idyllic roses and forest and cute little animals. There's some sadness and everything in there, but there's an a triumph of the goodness that comes through. So yeah.
Yes, I like because I think you can show The Lion King to kids at a pretty young age. The Lion King's got a lot of harsh stuff, you know,
Yeah.
like betrayal and death of loved ones and all that sort of stuff. Like it's not and like the film deals quite a bit with death itself, which is but I think kids can handle that. It's more so that like The Lion King isn't cynical, and the values of The Lion King aren't like, I don't know, about sort of destroying meaning and tearing away at meaning. It's the affirmation of meaning. You know what I mean? So I feel
Yeah.
like it's that sort of thing is more what I'm getting at than the idea of like certain things aren't for kids, not necessarily by virtue of the fact that like bad things happen in them or even that they're described in explicit ways. Like I think kids can withstand a lot of horror movies as well.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think there probably ought to be more horror movies aimed at like family audiences, kids included, provided that they're not just like horribly brutal for the sake of it, that there's like actually something there, that it's not just like, for example, I just went to see last night a movie called Presence by Steven Soderbergh. I went to see it at the theater, and it's like a rated R movie, and it's kind of horror adjacent. I didn't finish it because I thought it was really boring. I left, but there's a kid next to me who was like 9 years old, and their parent who brought their 9-year-old to this like R-rated like horror adjacent movie, and all the trailers before this were like other R-rated horror movies like that, like Hard Eyes Killer and just like a bunch of slashers and stuff like that. And I'm just like, why you don't take your kids to that? You know what I mean? Like, and it just feels like it's not so much that it's a horror movie or even that there's death and violence and all that sort of stuff in it. It's just that they're just kind of like empty, grotesque spectacles of death for their own sake. And I'm just like, I don't think, like, if adults want to partake in that, you know, for the thrill ride of it, that sure, that's one thing. But it's just like, I don't know, don't take your 9-year-old to see that, dude. Come on.
Yeah, no.
Like, what are you doing? Anyway, that's my ramble about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone says The Lion King is basically Hamlet. That's the other thing. They should be doing that more. They should just be taking classic stories and just setting them in talking animal settings. And they don't even need to be especially clever and original. They can just go, all right, let's do Macbeth, but with animals. Let's
Yeah.
do a comedy of errors with, I don't know, toy trains. I don't fucking know. Just like start throwing shit at the wall. But if you start from a basis of like, this is a story that has stood the test of time for a reason, and just let's adapt that faithfully and keep the spirit of that alive, and then we can just do something unique in terms of the setting and the visual presentation. You don't even need to really be all that original to like have a good foundation for a good movie right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Take a classic fairy tale. Don't try to change it to make it fit into sort of modern sensibilities, especially like narrow-minded political ones. You know what I mean? Like if they tried to make, okay, if they, obviously this has been something that they've been trying to get off the ground but hasn't worked. Let's say Snow White actually does well for them and they want to make a quote unquote live action 3D animated Bambi movie. It would not surprise me at all if the people making it were convinced that, oh, they need to give a bigger role for the female characters because the original just kind of treated them as props. And it's like, what are you doing? Like there's like, why do we need a feminist version of Bambi? You know what I mean? Like you could just take the classic stories that have stood the test of time for a reason and treat them as if, well, people remember them and people preserve them for a reason and they actually don't need to be changed. Like this is what drives me nuts about the Snow White phenomenon, that they're going to remake Snow White while completely changing it to like fit a more obviously feminist lens. It's like, well, the reason you're remaking Snow White is because the story doesn't need to be changed. The reason people still remember it, the reason people still love it, is because it's good enough already and you don't need to fix it. If it wasn't good enough and you needed to fix it, you wouldn't be remaking it because it wouldn't be beloved and it wouldn't have stood the test of time. Like, that's how that works. Like, that's what that means. The fact that you're remaking Snow White again means that Snow White is good and people will like it. You don't need to change it. So stop, please. Stop.
Yeah, exactly.
Please fucking stop. We're sick of it. Please. I hope Snow White flops, or at least it underperforms what they hoped it would, because I think this is kind of the final boss of that. Like this really could be the turning point for these remakes. If this one doesn't do well, they might stop. Honestly, like this really started in earnest with The Lion King 2019. But if this one tanks, they might actually learn something. So we'll see what happens.
Do you think it would have to tank and Mufasa would also have to tank?
You know, I don't know. I haven't actually looked to see how Mufasa has done.
Is it out?
Yes.
Oh,
it came out around Christmas.
I didn't even know that it was out. Okay, hold on. Okay. How much has it made? Oh, damn. Okay, so according to Box Office Mojo, Mufasa has made $653 million. That's not quite the Lion King 2019 levels. But
wasn't the Lion King 2019 over $1 billion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's still pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. I want to respond to a couple messages in the chat. Dr. Diddler, thank you very much for the super chat. Says, speaking of subversive and cartoons, any plans to ever review Fritz the Cat? No, that would be an amusing review. I have seen Fritz the Cat, and it's definitely the edgy, subversive
I have
sort
not
of
seen it.
cartoon.
I'm not really sure what it is actually.
We'll watch it and talk about it at some point
Oh, okay.
down the line. Down the line, maybe. Um, Unironically, Tobias says, unironically, kids should watch some R-rated movies. Yeah, I think some of them uh, would be totally good for kids. Like, there's this movie. It's not very popular, but it's a movie called The Fall. The Fall is a movie that's kind of like a children's fairy tale, but it's R-rated and mostly just for blood and stuff. Like, it's got a little bit of violence in it, but I think it's the kind of violence that a kid could handle. You know what I mean? Because the story itself is actually one that I think, kids of a certain age, not every age, but kids of a certain age could definitely handle and find meaningful and get something out of. Anyway, there's definitely some R-rated movies that I wouldn't scold the parent for showing to them because it's not just about the surface level of what is being depicted. It's like how it's being depicted and what the message and meaning of it is. And it's okay for kids to be scared of things, and because kids actually like being scared in controlled settings when, there's something like holding it all together for them. Um, let's see, gateway horror films are important. Yeah. If you aren't going to change anything, why even remake it? I'd ask. Well, so regarding remaking Snow White, it would be better if they didn't at all,
Yes.
right? For sure.
Yes.
But there's obviously like I wouldn't write off completely a live action Snow White movie. Unlike some other ones, like yeah, seeing that done in live action, if it's like beautifully shot and the story is more or less maintained, but you change some slight details, for the sake of the live action version instead of the animated version. Like obviously there's utility in that. Like Snow White has been retold and all that sort of stuff many times, and so I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with revisiting a classic fairy tale story or doing yet another adaptation of a Shakespeare story in a slightly different style and setting. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with that. Um, but you know that like these days, like Snow White and modern Disney writers, like they can't understand it. They can't allow themselves to understand and appreciate it for how it actually is because they're so caught up in a very sort of narrow-minded modern viewpoint that you just know that they can't, and of course they aren't leaving it be. They aren't like letting it be the story. They're completely changing it. Oh, now fair doesn't actually mean beautiful, it means being just. And it's like, oh, so it's just a completely different story wearing the skin suit of Snow White. Great, thanks.
Basically.
Thanks for that. If they did a live action version of Snow White that was almost beat for beat like the original, let's say it was actually well acted and it didn't really change anything. So part of the problem with Lion King 2019 isn't just that it's a beat for beat remake of The Lion King. It's also that the animation's way worse. The
Yes.
vocal act, like the acting performances are way worse. What little tiny bits they do add are worthless and make things worse. You know what I mean? It has no real redeeming qualities. If, for example, they remade Snow White and it was actually well acted and they kept the story intact and the performances were good and the music was good and it was well shot, like I think that would be fine. Fine to good. Maybe even great. Who knows? It
It
really
could
kind of
be.
depends.
It has it like it
Could be.
could. It could be. I mean, it would still
It might.
have the people, the detractors, like me, for example, being like, "Well, why wouldn't I just watch the original if it's just going to be a remake exactly the same?" Right? Like
Yeah,
that.
you would expect some changes, but there's been
Something.
enough changes across all the different versions of Snow White that you would expect a couple things to
Yeah.
change. Like I have, we talked about it when we talked about Snow White on stream. I have this book by Jonathan Pajot, which is an illustrated retelling of Snow White. It's the same classic fairy tale. It's not a subversive take on it, but there are some interesting changes in the story that matter. You know what I mean? Like that just kind of that emphasize certain thematic notes a bit more. You know what I mean? Like it's a handheld mirror instead of a mirror on the wall, such that the handheld mirror kind of like has a sort of visual allusion to like a smartphone in her hand. You know, like there's little things like that, little changes that you can accentuate certain motifs and certain themes a bit differently, and that's the sort of like thing you would hope for in a retelling of a classic fairy tale, is that it would keep the core intact, but just, it's the same dish, but maybe you emphasize slightly different ingredients this time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I think that would. Yeah, I think that would be fine. It could be good. It could even make it make it to
Hmm.
great status if you do it right.
And I
Then you have
think,
like issues with Aladdin, right, and the Beauty and the Beast remake that people are mentioning too. Like you expand on it in ways that are unnecessary, and in some ways, like with Aladdin, politically charged because we have to make sure that Jasmine has her own song because
yeah, yeah,
all that. Um,
yep.
yeah, it's the ways that they're doing it are big missteps, but I don't think that a live action version of a musical of Aladdin, or even like a live action version of a musical of The Lion King, like the Lion King Broadway show is fantastic. It's a
Oh, it
really
is. It's
worthwhile show to see, you know?
actually incredible. It's very good. I really enjoyed it. It was very expensive, but it was worth it.
Yeah.
It's a very good show.
So you could do a filmed version of that. And they add things in that show that, are not present in the movie. There are a couple songs that are in that show that aren't in the original movie that,
Hmm.
it could have been added or like filmed, in a live action version. And they didn't do
Yeah.
that,
No.
like, which is bizarre that they wouldn't, you know?
Yeah. Exhumed legume. Yes, the line in his version is "Mirror, mirror in my hand, who's the fairest in the land." Yep, that's the slight change to it. So it's little details like that. He also makes a couple changes to the story of the dwarfs. He makes them thieves at first, which is interesting. They're thieves and bandits in the woods who like are essentially redeemed by Snow White and choose to stop being thieves as a result of their encounter with her. So it's there's some slight changes like that that keep the sort of core ethos intact, but while like, making interesting changes. And so that's the kind of thing you would hope for if they were going to do another version of Snow White. The other option is they just don't do another version of Snow White.
Yeah.
That would also be acceptable, maybe even preferable, all things considered. But it's like I wouldn't write it off completely, but these days, like I would write off any Disney remake completely. Because why would I expect it to be good? Why
Yeah.
why?
Oh, I
you know?
forgot about the Mulan remake. Jesus Christ.
Oh God, yeah, that's a pretty bad one. Yeah,
I didn't realize there was a Cinderella one either. Apparently better than the anime. Oh well, we'll have that discussion when we get around to it. The Cinderella animated film is coming around the pipeline.
Exhumed Legume makes a great point. It's the same point I thought as soon as I saw the new trailer. The whole "we don't mean fair isn't beautiful anymore" thing makes no sense. Why would an evil queen care about being fair in any other sense? Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
They start mucking about with these things, and then they're saying things they don't intend to say, and all meaning starts to fall apart because they haven't thought about it. And it's going to be so bad, and I'm going to force myself to watch it, even though I know it's not going to be good,
Oh boy.
because I just have to know, because this is like the one that matters most. I think
Yeah.
it's Disney's first movie. It's one of the more ancient of all the stories. You know what I mean? It's not
Well, the
the most.
CGI
It's
on the
like,
dwarves alone is
oh
enough
God,
to like
it's bad.
yeah.
It's bad. Yeah. But anyway, one of the reasons I like going back to these movies is remembering like just how like stylish and beautiful they are. I think that has been lost.
Yeah.
Disney has completely forgotten that part of it. And I think all the amazing, like groundbreaking work a lot of these animators did um, really made Disney the name that it was for a
Yeah.
reason. And I think some of these movies, but especially Snow White and Pinocchio, are movies that modern storytelling has sort of moved so far away from, that they're very refreshing.
Yeah.
to go revisit. The same way that like watching The Lord of the Rings is refreshing, even if you've seen it a million times, because so many things these days aren't interested in or refuse to sort of tell those kind of like affirming stories. And so it's really nice to revisit movies like this and go, this is what Disney could get back to if they wanted to. Like they could do it. It probably they probably won't be the ones to do it. They'll probably keep running themselves very slowly into the ground. Um, but I think other animation studios are doing a better job of sort of getting back to this sort of thing. But it's fun to rewatch these movies because everything's changed so much that these feel fresh and new again. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like this isn't just this really feels like a completely different worldview coming through, you know? And I really like it. It's really fun to watch. It's
I don't know.
very enjoyable.
I feel like there is a chance that Disney kind of pivots, right? Like if there are a couple of real big failures on the way, which I mean,
Mhm.
I was kind of expecting Mufasa to be pretty middling, but we'll
Yeah.
see. But if Snow White, and I mean, honestly, I know this isn't really Disney. This is on a different, like, sub arm of the umbrella. But if that Captain America movie and Snow White bomb back to back, like, I think we
Yeah.
might start to see them kind of pivot a little bit to, some of what they used to do back in their golden and, silver
Maybe.
ages. It's
Maybe.
possible.
I have honestly I have more faith in like Disney doing that than Marvel
Yeah.
specifically doing that. Because like the Disney animated like they clearly, the success of The Lion King 2019 was like, "Oh, okay, well this is what we're going to do for the next 10 to 20 years if no one stops us."
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I could see them pivoting if that stops working. We'll see what they do with it. But like a lot of the best periods in Disney's history come after a sort of like lull or lack of success. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
the Disney Renaissance is probably the best example of that because there are some absolutely incredible movies in that little run. But they had to face some financial difficulties and problems for that to happen.
Yeah,
Snow
basically throughout
White,
the entire 80s.
yeah, the Snow White being the success it was, that was a huge risk. And he was like, he was hungry at the time. He had to like, he risked it all. He like bet big on this
He
working.
bet big on all of these actually, because
Yeah.
like Bambi underperformed at the box office. It didn't get great reception. In fact, a lot of the critique from the time is very similar to the things we've talked about here, right? Like it's a little
Yeah.
confused. It's a little thin on story. It's beautifully animated, but it's
Mhm.
not. It's actually there's also a really strange through line in some of the old reviews of Bambi about how Disney's taken a huge misstep by leaving the fantasy elements of his stories behind. So, like, that's another interesting thing about this one, right? Is that there's not as much, or it's much more understated. The like Snow White,
Then like yeah, and
the
Pinocchio.
dwarves, and Pinocchio, the fairy, and Dumbo, the stork, the magic, all of that, right? That's all been
Mhm.
left behind for Bambi, and it's a little more realistic. And people were didn't believe in that as much. They were a little bit
You know
off
what?
put.
I wouldn't say I found it off-putting, but I do miss that.
Yeah,
I like when he does the sort of fairy tale, almost more mythological stuff. I like that better for sure. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I love Snow White, but Pinocchio is my favorite so far of the ones we've talked about, and I think that's a big part of it because Pinocchio is just like a fairy tale through and through in every way. It's like got all sorts of weird magical stuff, like like the descent into the whale. Like there's obviously like there's biblical allusions, there's all that sort of stuff. It's great.
yeah.
I really like it.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of good. So Bambi kind of underperformed, and
Hmm.
they like, from what I was able to find, Pinocchio also did not do as well as he needed it to, and neither did Dumbo. Fantasia definitely did not. So
Yeah.
he was kind of closing out. Like this in the future became his favorite of his movies. He would talk about this as
Okay.
being like his best work. But he's kind of closing out his golden age because this is the end of that the traditionally defined golden age of Disney movies because he's gonna start producing a lot of content during World War II now.
Mhm.
He's kind of closing it out on a little bit of a soft victory, I would say, because it's still a
Yeah.
win. It made its money back, and it did on multiple runs because this is when you did that,
Yeah.
on multiple runs it ended up making its money back and becoming a pretty rousing success. But for the first couple of months, or for the first little bit, this movie was not a huge success, and so that kind of is going to propel him further
To do
beyond
better.
to do
Yeah.
better. And like the next two that we're going to cover, one of them is Saludos Amigos, which I don't know if you've seen that one. Have you
No, I can't even picture a single frame from it. I don't know what that is at all.
It is a very short, like almost Fantasia type thing with Donald Duck in it, but it was I find it I want to watch it because one, it's kind of short, but two, it was sort of intended as a way to like I want to say create a new world order, essentially.
What?
The U.S. government sort of like gave him money to pull Latin American countries away from the influence of Nazi Germany, and this is the movie that he
Hmm.
came up with, was Donald Duck visiting bird relatives
Mexico.
in Mexico and
Okay.
Brazil. Yeah, Donald Duck
Okay.
visiting Mexico and Brazil.
Is that a feature length movie?
No, it's not feature length. That's
How
why
long is it?
it's hold on, let me take a look. It's shorter than most of his
It's what, Saludos Amigas? Is that what it's
Saludos
called?
Amigos. It's 42 minutes, so it's pretty short.
Okay. It's a long short film.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah, we'll
I
talk,
want to
and we're
cover
gonna
that, and then
that and
Song
then
of the
Song of
South, because that's the only
the
other one that is a feature length. That's the only one that is a feature length one that was released during this wartime era. The rest of
Okay.
it was sort of like the Donald Duck Nazi
So,
cartoons,
yes. Okay. So we'll talk about those, and I'm very excited to finally see what all the fuss is about with regards to Song of the South. That'll be
Yes,
fun.
me too.
Uh,
I have never seen it, and I am very excited.
so what okay, so what comes after Song of the South? So we're gonna talk about those
Cinderella.
two. Cinderella. Oh,
We are
okay. See,
right
there
in
you
on the
go.
Silver Age, yeah.
There he goes. And then with the first big one back is classic fairy tale. Right back to
Exactly.
Grimm's
Yeah.
Brothers fairy. Is it Grimm's Brothers of
Yeah,
Cinderella?
I think the Grimm brothers is
Okay, yeah.
it's in there somewhere.
Sweet. I like Cinderella. Cinderella's good. So I'm excited to rewatch that. There's a lot of these that I'm very excited to rewatch. So I'm very much enjoying going back and watching these. They're very like refreshing is a word that keeps coming back to mind. There's something that
Yeah.
that feels very we went to see Presents last night and I thought it kind of sucked. I thought it was really boring. It was like watching a really bad play with nauseating cinematography. I don't recommend Presents, but I didn't watch it all the way through, so take that with a grain of salt. I came back home and I'm like, can we just watch something nice? I gotta watch Bambi for tomorrow. So we watched Bambi, and it's like, yeah, that's nice. Bambi's a nice movie.
Yeah. Yeah, so he goes like after a couple of rough things, he goes back to the classic fairy tales, and then we jump into what's called the Silver Age, but what you could probably argue
Keep
is
going.
the
What
actual
what
golden age, right? Like that's
Yeah, you could. What comes after Cinderella?
let me get the order
Yeah,
exactly
get the
right
order. Get
here.
that order up. Yes, everyone should see Song of the South to make up their own minds. That's what we intend to do.
Yeah, that is my intention.
You gotta see what all the fuss is about because someone mentioned Fantasia and the censorship there. Interesting thing, we talked about it when we covered it, but for those who didn't watch that one, Fantasia 1940 or whatever year it was is a movie that on Disney Plus is like has a little warning at the front, a little content warning that says like rather than censor it, we're just going to show it as is, but just understand that it's problematic. But that's actually a lie. Because
Yeah.
Fantasia does remove the most offensive part of Fantasia, which is like blackface, like minstrel show blackface that one of the like centaurs is in. They actually just cut that out of the movie while also claiming that they're just going to preserve it as is with the acknowledgement that there are offensive bits. But they got rid of the most offensive parts, the cowards, and Song of the South isn't even on Disney Plus, correct?
No, no, it is not.
So we're gonna
we
have
are going to
to.
be watching that through Internet Archive, actually.
Sweet.
Yeah, it is free on because Disney does not fight copyright claims on that movie.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting. So, okay, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, so his adaptation of Sleepy Hollow, that's like an anthology thing. That happened in 1949, and
Okay.
I don't think we have that on our list because it's technically not a feature. So, but he did come back with that first.
Okay.
And then we have
But
Cinderella.
it's not a feature film,
Yeah,
right?
not a
Well,
feature.
it's
But
an
we
hour
could
and 8 minutes long,
we could
but it
we could
wasn't
throw,
theatrical. Is that right?
it's two parts. It's like two short films slapped
Oh,
together.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd rather focus on the big theatrical releases.
Yeah, I just
Personally.
really wanted to check out Saludos Amigos,
Sure.
as a little aside, because I grew up watching The Three Caballeros, which is the sequel to it. I've never seen Saludos Amigos, but I find it very interesting. This like sort of
Yeah, we'll
dream
talk about
that
that
the
one.
world had, that maybe America, Mexico, and Brazil would become the next like triple entente. And Disney kind of pushing that, and I don't think it never really materialized. But anyway, the Silver Age, post-war time, I would argue maybe even the actual Golden Age, possibly. Cinderella, Alice in
Mhm.
Wonderland, Peter Pan,
Okay.
Lady and
Yep.
the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty, 101 Dalmatians, Sword in the Stone, um, Mary Poppins. Does that count? I guess, sort of.
No,
No?
we're not going to count that. There's
Okay.
animated sequences in it, but it's mostly live action. We're not going to count that.
Sword in the Stone, The Jungle Book, The Aristocats.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
that's
a
quite a run.
that's a
That's quite
hell
a
of a
run.
run.
Yeah. So yeah, lots to look forward to there. So I suppose we'll wrap it up here. That's a discussion of Bambi. I think Bambi's an easy recommendation, though I just not one of the best of the Disney movies, but it's still quite enjoyable to watch. It's quite an enjoyable aesthetic experience. I think that's the strongest thing about it, and it's an easy recommend. So go check it out if you haven't seen it in a while. We'll see you next week for Song of the South and the other thing Hugh told me about.
Yes.
I forgot what it's called. That'll be fun, and I don't know. We'll see
Song
what all
of
the
the
fuss
South
is
and Song
about.
of the Mexicans.
So if you want to find out what the fuss is about for yourself, that's what we'll be talking about next weekend, next
Yeah.
Sunday. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much for the super chat. Matthew Leach says, "Can you all start the Pixar arc soon instead of doing it after the 2D Disney arc?"
Maybe. I mean, like that. We could maybe work
Maybe.
that in somewhere. I don't
Maybe.
see why not. We could, start start a second arc, continuing.
My
Um,
worry is having too many arcs going at once.
Yeah, we'll,
Because
we'll talk about it. And
but
real
we'll
quick,
figure
I
it out.
also want to address just a couple of other things. Wassermans asks, "What about Robin Hood?" That one is, I think, generally considered the start of the Bronze Age when things started to sort of fall apart for them. I think that's after he died. It's the first one released after Walt Disney passed away. I'm pretty sure. I'll
Okay.
so that people consider that the Bronze Age. The Black Cauldron is considered part of the Dark Age, but we will be getting into that as well.
Yeah, we'll cover all of them.
Yeah. So yeah.
So that's the plan. Yeah, thanks for joining us. Thank you for the super chats. And we'll see you next Sunday, if not with a video sooner than that. Who knows? I can no
Yeah.
promises. But thanks for joining us again. And goodbye.